My husband's mistress walked into my baby shower uninvited wearing a smirk and the exact designer perfume he claimed he bought by mistake last month. She leaned over my 8-month pregnant belly and whispered that he would be moving in with her soon. I did not scream or cry. I simply raised my right hand. 2 security guards I hired that morning stepped out of the shadows, gripped her arms, and dragged her out the front door, while 50 guests watched in dead silence. My husband's face drained of color, but his panic was not for me. The clinking of crystal glasses stopped. The air in my Buckhead living room grew thick. Sienna, a 25-year-old junior analyst from Julian's firm, thrashed against the 2 men in black suits. Her heels scraped across the imported hardwood floor, knocking over a pile of pastel gift boxes. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her, cutting off her protests. Julian sprinted across the room. He did not check to see if I was okay. He rushed to the front window, his chest heaving, his eyes tracking the driveway. He watched her leave with the desperate terror of a man watching his lifeline burn. The moment the last uncomfortable guest scurried out the door, Julian turned on me. He marched across the Persian rug and gripped my wrist, pinning my arm against the kitchen counter. "You are out of your mind." He spat his breath hot against my face. "She is a junior staffer dropping off client files. You just ruined my career over your psychotic pregnancy hormones." I tried to pull my arm away, but his grip tightened, sending a sharp ache shooting up to my shoulder. He let go only to grab a crystal champagne flute from the island. He hurled it against the marble backsplash. Shards of glass rained down near my feet. I flinched, wrapping both arms instinctively around my swollen stomach to shield my baby. Beatrice, Julian's mother, stood by the refrigerator. She did not flinch at the shattering glass. She casually adjusted her diamond collar necklace and let out a long, disappointed sigh. "You are humiliating this family, Vivian," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "Your pathetic insecurities are suffocating my son. Look at what you made him do." A deep, steady voice cut through the kitchen. Marcus, my sister Lauren's husband, stepped into the room. Marcus is an African-American corporate attorney who negotiates billion-dollar acquisitions. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. He stepped over the broken crystal, his polished leather shoes crunching on the shards, and stopped inches from Julian. "You are sweating cold, Julian," Marcus said, his gaze fixed on my husband's pale forehead. "Do not play games with us." Julian took a step back, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple. He shoved his hands into his pockets and looked away. The pieces clicked together in my mind. Julian was not enraged because I ruined a party. He was terrified because Sienna might have exposed a much darker secret. 4 years ago, Julian was a charming financial director who convinced me to merge our bank accounts, promising total transparency. I fell for the perfect husband routine. He thought I was just a naive, pregnant woman he could intimidate. He forgot that I am a forensic accountant, and numbers never lie. My name is Vivian. I am 32 years old. Before I tell you how I tracked down every missing dollar and handed my husband to the federal authorities, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you know a betrayer always leaves a paper trail. The final guest practically ran down the driveway, leaving the front door ajar, just long enough for the cold Georgia wind to sweep into the foyer. Julian did not bother closing it gently. He kicked the heavy mahogany wood shut with the heel of his Oxford shoe. The sound snapped through the living room like a gunshot. I stood by the kitchen island, one hand resting on the swell of my stomach, waiting for the apology. I waited for the panicked excuses, the frantic backpedaling, the begging that usually follows a caught betrayer. Instead, Julian marched toward me, his jaw set, his eyes dark and empty. He tore the silk tie from his neck, leaving the top button of his shirt undone, and backed me against the edge of the granite counter. "You are a paranoid, psychotic mess, Vivian," he hissed, spraying saliva against my cheek. "She is a junior analyst. She drove all the way across town on a Sunday to hand-deliver urgent compliance files, and you treat her like a streetwalker. You threw her out in front of my managing partners." I stared at the pulsing vein on the side of his neck. Urgent compliance files do not come wrapped in a tight red cocktail dress. I said, my voice steady, despite the tremor shaking my knees. Junior analysts do not wear limited edition Tom Ford perfume and whisper about moving in with their boss. Julian slammed his fist down on the granite counter. The leftover silver spoons rattled against the porcelain dessert plates. "You are delusional." He roared, stepping even closer, forcing me to lean backward to avoid his chest. Your pregnancy hormones have fried your brain. You see threats in every shadow because you spend all day staring at spreadsheets. You are destroying my professional reputation over a hallucination. A slow, deliberate clapping drew our attention to the archway. Beatrice, my husband's mother, stood there with a fresh glass of Prosecco in her manicured hand. She wore a tailored cashmere cardigan, looking entirely unbothered by the fact that her son was towering over his heavily pregnant wife. Beatrice took a sip from her glass and offered me a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Julian is right," Beatrice said, her tone smooth and lethal. "You are humiliating this family over your ridiculous insecurities. I warned Julian about marrying a woman who overthinks every tiny detail. Look at yourself, Vivian. You are swollen, exhausted, and acting like a common hysteric. A smart woman would offer her husband a quiet sanctuary. Instead, you create a circus in front of Buckhead's finest families." I gripped the edge of the counter, my fingernails digging into the cold stone. "Your son is sleeping with his subordinate Beatrice," I replied, fighting to keep my breathing even. She walked into my home and told me to my face. Beatrice waved a dismissive hand, letting out a dry scoff. "Men in Julian's position face temptations. If you were a proper wife, he would not need to look elsewhere. Do not blame him for your failure to keep his attention." Julian did not defend me against his mother's venom. He absorbed her words as validation, his chest puffing out as he stepped away from the counter. He snatched his Audi car keys from the ceramic bowl by the door. His eyes held zero remorse, only a cold, calculating annoyance. He twisted the narrative so quickly, punishing me for exposing his dirty secret instead of showing an ounce of shame. "I am leaving," Julian announced, slipping into his tailored suit jacket. "I have to go find Sienna and apologize to a valued colleague because my psycho wife lost her grip on reality. Do not call my phone. I will be doing damage control for the rest of the evening." Julian. I breathed out the sudden tightness in my chest, making it difficult to pull air into my lungs. "I am having a contraction." He paused with his hand on the brass doorknob. He looked at my pale face, looked at my hands clutching my belly, and let out a harsh breath through his nose. "Drink a glass of water and lie down. I do not have time for your theatrics right now." The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Beatrice gave me one last look of sheer disdain, placed her empty Prosecco glass on the hall table, and walked out the back door to her waiting town car. I was alone. The silence in the house rang in my ears. The adrenaline that had kept my spine straight during the confrontation evaporated, leaving behind a crushing wave of physical panic. My knees buckled. I slid down the front of the kitchen cabinets, my back scraping against the polished wood until I hit the floor. The air refused to enter my lungs. I gasped, my chest heaving, the room spinning in dizzying circles. My hands shook uncontrollably as I braced them against the hardwood floor. A sharp cramp ripped across my lower abdomen. I curled inward, surrounded by torn wrapping paper, discarded pastel ribbons, and tiny baby clothes scattered across the rug. The baby kicked hard against my ribs, a sharp reminder of what was at stake. I was hyperventilating, struggling to find a focal point in the spinning room to ground myself. My blurred vision locked onto the fireplace mantel across the living room. Resting dead center was a heavy gold-plated frame holding our wedding photograph. In that picture, Julian looked at me like I was the center of his universe. He was smiling, wiping a joyful tear from my cheek while holding my hands. The contrast between the man in that photograph and the monster who just walked out the door felt like a physical blow to the ribs. 4 years ago, Julian was a charismatic, attentive finance director who seemed to anticipate my every need. He courted me with a relentless, gentle persistence. He remembered the exact way I took my coffee, surprised me with weekend trips to coastal cabins, and always listened with rapt attention when I talked about my grueling forensic audits. He built a flawless facade. Julian was the man who held my hair back when I was sick, the man who brought soup to my office during tax season, the man who knelt in the pouring rain outside my favorite bakery to ask for my hand in marriage. He wrapped me in a cocoon of devotion so thick that it blinded me to the subtle warning signs. It takes a master manipulator to disarm a woman whose entire career revolves around finding hidden lies. I spent my days tearing apart corporate ledgers, tracing shell companies, and exposing embezzlers. I was trained to trust nothing but the raw data. Yet Julian systematically dismantled my professional skepticism with sweet promises of partnership. "We are a team, Vivian," he used to whisper in the dark, stroking my hair. "A real marriage operates on unwavering trust. No secrets. We build our empire together." He used those exact words to convince me to merge our separate financial lives. He suggested we pool our resources into a joint wealth management account to maximize our investments for our future children. It sounded logical. It sounded like true love. I signed the authorization forms without running the background checks I would normally perform on any standard business partner. I let my guard down for the man I loved, sitting on the kitchen floor grasping my pregnant belly to soothe the cramping, the sickening truth settled in my mind. The grand romance, the shared bank accounts, the endless speeches about unwavering trust were never about building a future. They were the calculated steps of a predator cornering his prey. That golden facade lured me into a perfect, inescapable trap. He isolated me from my own instincts. He convinced me that questioning him was an insult to our marriage. I forced myself to take a deep, ragged breath. I closed my eyes and counted to 10, willing the panic attack to subside. The cramping in my stomach slowly eased into a dull ache. I opened my eyes and looked at the scattered baby gifts again. Julian thought he could break me. He thought the heavy weight of an 8-month pregnancy and the cruel words of his mother would force me into quiet submission. He forgot that before I was a wife and before I was a mother, I was an auditor. I wiped the cold sweat from my forehead and pushed myself up from the floor. I did not reach for my phone to call him back. I began picking up the torn ribbons and crushed boxes one by one. I would wait for him to finish his damage control. I would wait for him to return to this house and fall asleep in our bed. He forgot the fundamental rule of my profession. A liar always leaves a paper trail. The digital clock on the bedside table flashed 2:14 in the morning. Julian lay beside me, his breathing heavy and rhythmic, smelling faintly of scotch and expensive cigars. He had returned hours after the baby shower ended, slipping into bed without saying a single word. The silence in the dark room felt heavy, pressing against my chest like a physical weight. The panic from earlier had subsided, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. My tears had dried up on the kitchen floor. The time for crying was over. The forensic accountant inside me took the wheel. I slid out from under the duvet, my bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. I pressed a hand to my lower back, ignoring the persistent dull ache radiating from my spine, and tiptoed down the hallway to my home office. The hardwood floor felt freezing against my soles. I closed the heavy oak door behind me, ensuring the lock clicked into place as quietly as possible. The room was bathed in the pale moonlight filtering through the plantation shutters. I did not turn on the overhead lamp. I sat down in my leather ergonomic chair and opened my laptop. The screen flickered to life, casting a stark white glow across my face. Julian handled the day-to-day transfers for our joint accounts, managing the investments, while I focused on long-term tax structuring. It was an arrangement built on the trust he had so carefully manufactured. I pulled up the secure login portal for our primary wealth management portfolio. My fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard, typing in the credentials. The loading icon spun for a few excruciating seconds before the dashboard populated. My eyes scanned the summary boxes, bypassing the retirement funds and the liquid checking balances. I scrolled directly down to the sub-account labeled Vanguard Maternity Reserve. I had opened that specific fund 2 years ago when we first started trying to conceive. I routed 50% of my annual bonuses and every spare dollar from my consulting side projects into that account. It was the financial safety net designed to cover my unpaid maternity leave, the inevitable out-of-network costs for the high-risk C-section my doctor warned me about, and the premium postpartum care I knew I would need. I had painstakingly built that balance to exactly $80,000. The balance line on the screen stared back at me. $0.00. My heart slammed against my ribs. I blinked, leaning closer to the monitor, convinced the banking portal was experiencing a glitch. I hit refresh. The page reloaded. The number remained unchanged. 0. A wave of nausea washed over me. I clicked into the transaction history, my hands shaking so violently that I misclicked twice before opening the ledger. There it was. A single clean outgoing wire transfer dated 3 days ago, right before the weekend. $80,000 routed to a receiving account under the name Vertex Horizon LLC. The transaction memo simply read, Venture Capital Seed Investment. Julian had emptied my maternity fund. He wiped out 2 years of my sweat, my late nights, and my financial security with one click. The money I saved to bring our child into this world safely was gone. I did not scream. The shock morphed instantly into a razor-sharp, hyper-focused rage. I opened a new browser tab and accessed the Georgia Secretary of State Corporate Registry database. Vertex Horizon LLC sounded like a generic shell company designed to hide money. In my line of work, generic names are red flags screaming for an audit. I typed the entity name into the search bar and hit enter. The database pulled up the formation documents filed just 6 months ago. I clicked on the PDF of the initial registration filing. I scrolled past the registered agent information and the standard operating clauses, my eyes scanning for the principal officers. The screen illuminated the name of the managing director in bold black font, Sienna Brooks. The air in my lungs vanished. I stopped breathing. I stared at the name on the screen until the letters blurred together. Julian did not just cheat on me. He did not just bring his mistress to my home to humiliate me. He took the money I bled for, the money meant to protect his unborn child, and he handed it directly to a 25-year-old junior analyst to fund her fake startup. He stole from my womb to finance his affair. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I needed hard copies. I needed the routing numbers, the timestamps, and the IP addresses attached to the transfer. I clicked the download button on the bank statement. I needed every piece of raw data securely stored on my encrypted external drive before I confronted him. A red error banner flashed across the top of my screen. Session expired. Please log in again to continue. I frowned, my brow furrowing in confusion. I had been active on the page. The system should not have timed out. I quickly typed my password into the login fields and hit enter. Invalid credentials. Please try again. My pulse quickened. I typed the password slower this time, ensuring capitalization and special characters were perfectly accurate. I hit enter again. Account locked. Password changed recently. Please contact customer support. I stared at the red text. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The bank system did not lock me out due to a glitch. The password was changed manually. I glanced at the small network icon in the corner of my screen. Someone else was logged into the primary network. Julian was not asleep. He was awake, watching the network traffic from his phone in the bedroom, and he saw me access the banking portal. He knew I was looking. A soft, deliberate creak sounded from the hallway outside my office, the floorboards shifting under weight. He was standing right outside the door. He was waiting. Sunlight pierced through the kitchen blinds, casting sharp, unforgiving lines across the marble island. I sat on the bar stool, staring at the cold cup of black tea resting between my hands. I had not slept a single minute. The sound of the floorboards shifting outside my office door hours earlier remained etched in my mind. Julian had stood there in the dark, watching the network traffic on his phone, before turning around and leaving the house before dawn. Now the heavy oak front door clicked open, breaking the morning silence. Julian strode into the foyer. He wore a fresh charcoal-tailored suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie perfectly knotted at his throat. He looked rested, polished, and untouched by the devastation he caused the night before. He did not offer a greeting. He bypassed the coffee maker and walked straight toward me, his leather shoes tapping a sharp, authoritative rhythm against the hardwood floor. He reached into his designer briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of stapled legal paper, and tossed it onto the marble island. The document landed with a heavy thud right next to my teacup. I looked down at the first page. The header read, Non-Disclosure and Asset Management Agreement. I did not need to read the fine print to know what it meant. It was a gag order wrapped in corporate legalese designed to silence a wife who asked too many questions. Julian leaned his hands on the counter, invading my personal space. His expensive cologne masked whatever scent he brought back from his early morning excursion. I saw you snooping on the network, Vivian, he said, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth. You always were too curious for your own good. It is a fatal flaw in a marriage. I looked up at him, keeping my expression neutral, despite the adrenaline pumping through my veins. You took $80,000 from your unborn child to fund your mistress. He let out a dry, condescending laugh, shaking his head, as if I had just told a foolish joke. I did not take anything. We are married. We signed the paperwork to merge our accounts. That means they are joint funds. As the primary earner and the financial director of this household, I allocate our capital where I see the most potential. Venture capital requires liquid cash. It is a strategic investment to secure our family's future. An investment in Sienna, I stated, refusing to let him blur the lines with his corporate jargon. You routed my maternity savings into a shell company run by a 25-year-old junior analyst. Julian's eyes hardened. The mask of the charming, devoted husband dissolved entirely, revealing the ruthless predator lurking beneath. He despised being challenged, especially by a woman he believed he owned. Listen to me very carefully, he warned, his tone dropping into a lethal register. You are going to sign that document. You are going to acknowledge that the transfer was a mutually agreed-upon financial strategy. And you are going to stop this paranoid witch hunt right now before you ruin my career, or what I challenged, my pulse picking up speed. Julian stood up straight, adjusting his silver cufflinks with chilling detachment. Or I will destroy your life. If you utter a single word about Sienna to anyone, or if you try to drag my professional name through the mud over a standard business transfer, I will unleash my firm's legal team on you. Do you think you can afford a war of attrition against a corporate litigation department? Your little accounting salary will not cover the retainer fees. He leaned in again, his face inches from mine, his eyes scanning my tired features like a hunter assessing a wounded deer. You threw a hysterical scene at a high-profile party. You hired security guards to physically remove an innocent junior employee in front of my managing partners. You are sleep-deprived. You are acting erratic. Do you know how easy it is for a team of ruthless lawyers to build a case for severe prenatal depression and delusional disorder? A family court judge will look at a woman who kicks guests out of her home and hacks into financial portals in the middle of the night, and they will see a mother unfit to care for a newborn. I felt the blood drain from my face. The room seemed to tilt. He was weaponizing my mental state. He was using the very stress he caused to build a psychological cage around me. He knew exactly how the justice system treated women branded as unstable, and he was ready to exploit that bias to protect his affair. I will take full custody the moment that baby takes its first breath. Julian continued, his voice steady and merciless. I will have you committed for psychiatric evaluation, and you will be allowed supervised visits every other weekend in a sterile, monitored room. You will miss the first steps. You will miss the first words. You will lose your child, Vivian. You will lose this house. You will lose your reputation. You will end up with nothing but a medical record labeling you as a hazard to your own offspring. I sat frozen on the bar stool. The cold marble pressed against my forearm, sending a shiver down my spine. The baby kicked hard against my ribs, a sharp reminder of what was truly at stake. My mind, trained to process risk and calculate outcomes under extreme pressure, raced through the variables. Julian was not bluffing. He had the financial resources, the connections, and the lack of a moral compass required to execute that threat flawlessly. If I fought him right now, relying purely on raw emotion and unverified suspicions, he would crush me in court. He would frame my righteous anger as hysterical paranoia. He would paint himself as the long-suffering husband, trying to protect his child from an unhinged wife. I needed hard evidence. I needed an ironclad paper trail that even a corrupt judge could not dismiss. I needed routing numbers, wire logs, and proof of his illicit company structures. To get that, I needed time. And to buy time, I had to give him exactly what he wanted. I had to let him believe he won. I had to swallow my maternal rage and think like a liquidator dismantling a hostile corporation. I forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged. I let my shoulders slump forward, collapsing the strong, defiant posture I always maintained. I looked down at the legal document, allowing my hands to tremble visibly as I reached for the edges of the paper. I willed a tear to pool in the corner of my eye and spill over my cheek, tracing a hot path down my face. Please, Julian, I whispered, injecting a pathetic tremor into my voice. Please do not take my baby away. I am just so tired. The hormones, the stress of the pregnancy, the late nights at work. Maybe I am not thinking straight. Maybe I overreacted at the party. I just want our family to be okay. Julian's rigid posture relaxed instantly. A smug, triumphant smirk spread across his face, lighting up his eyes with a sickening satisfaction. He thrived on submission. He fed on the power of breaking a strong woman down into a weeping, compliant mess. He walked around the kitchen island, stood beside my stool, and reached out to pat my head like one would comfort a disobedient but broken pet. "That is better," he murmured, his tone shifting back to that condescending, sweet cadence he used when we first met. "You just need to rest, Vivian. Sign the paper. Focus on baking the baby. Let the men handle the complicated business matters. We are going to be a perfect, happy family. You just have to play your part and stop questioning my decisions." I picked up the expensive fountain pen resting beside the document. My fingers shook just enough to make my signature look frail, rushed, and uncertain. I signed my name on the dotted line, legally binding myself to his fabricated narrative, acknowledging a lie to save my future. I pushed the paper across the counter toward him, keeping my eyes cast downward in feigned defeat. Julian picked up the document, folded it neatly, and slid it into his briefcase. He checked his luxury watch and smoothed his lapels, looking immensely pleased with his morning's work. "I have a board meeting," he announced, turning his back on me without a second thought. "I will be home late. Do not wait up." He walked out of the kitchen, his leather shoes clicking confidently against the hardwood floor. The heavy front door opened and shut. The engine of his Audi roared to life in the driveway and faded down the street, leaving me alone in the sprawling house. The moment the engine noise vanished, my trembling stopped entirely. I wiped the single tear from my cheek with the back of my hand. I sat up straight, my spine rigid, my breathing slow and controlled. I looked at the empty spot where the document had rested. Julian thought he had just neutered my defenses. He thought my signature on a piece of paper meant surrender. He did not realize that a forensic auditor never stops working just because the files are locked. He underestimated my capacity for patience. The act of submission was not a white flag. It was the starting gun for a relentless, calculated war, and I was going to tear his life apart, brick by brick. The silence Julian left behind did not last long. My phone buzzed against the marble countertop, the sudden vibration jarring my nerves. I stared at the screen. It was an unknown number, but my intuition, honed by years of uncovering corporate deception, told me exactly who was on the other end. I swiped the screen open. A high-resolution image loaded in the message thread. I looked at the photograph. The background featured the snow-capped peaks and luxury timber facades of an exclusive ski resort in Aspen. In the center of the frame stood Julian. His arm was wrapped tight around Sienna's waist, his face pressed intimately against her temple, sporting a wide, carefree smile I had not seen directed at me in months. The image carried a sickening context. Exactly 1 month ago, Julian packed his leather weekender bag, kissed my forehead, and told me he had to attend a mandatory insurance conference in Denver. He complained about the tedious schedule and promised to call me every night. Instead, he was standing on a snowy mountain parading his mistress around a high-end resort. But the detail that twisted the knife deep into my gut was not the location or the lie. It was the coat Sienna wore in the picture. She was bundled in a slate-gray shearling jacket with distinct silver clasps. It was not a generic piece of winter wear. I recognized every stitch. I spent 3 weeks tracking down that specific designer jacket for Julian's birthday last year. I bought it as a gift to celebrate his promotion. Now his 25-year-old subordinate was wearing my gift, draped in my husband's arms. A second text message popped up right beneath the image. It read, "He bought me this trip with your maternity fund." A sharp, searing pain shot across my chest. My breath caught in my throat. The sheer cruelty of the message was designed to break me. Sienna wanted me to shatter. She wanted me to call Julian in a hysterical fit, providing him with the exact ammunition he needed to execute his threat of institutionalizing me. I placed the phone face down on the counter. I closed my eyes and dug my fingernails into my palms until the dull sting anchored my racing mind. I refused to give her the satisfaction. I glanced at the wall clock. It was 8 in the morning. Today was my 32-week ultrasound, a crucial milestone in my high-risk pregnancy. It was the appointment designated to check the baby's heart development and measure the amniotic fluid levels. For weeks, Julian swore he would clear his schedule to be there. Just an hour before he handed me that gag order this morning, he sent a brief, sterile text message claiming he was trapped in an emergency board meeting. He told me to ask the technician to print extra sonogram pictures for his desk. I grabbed my purse and my car keys. I walked out to my car and drove myself to the clinic. The morning traffic in Atlanta crawled at a sluggish pace, giving me far too much time to sit with the crushing weight of my reality. My physical discomfort mirrored my psychological torment. My lower back ached with a relentless throbbing pressure, and my swollen feet pressed heavily against the gas pedal. Yet my mind operated with cold, mechanical efficiency. I walked into the bright, sterile lobby of the maternity clinic. The waiting room was filled with expectant couples. Husbands sat close to their wives, holding hands, flipping through parenting magazines, and sharing quiet, excited whispers about nursery colors and baby names. I took a seat in the far corner, a solitary figure in a sea of shared joy. The contrast was a bitter pill to swallow. I was carrying a life inside me, preparing to bring a child into a home that was rotting from the inside out. Vivian, the nurse, called out holding a clipboard. I stood up, smoothing the front of my maternity dress, and followed her down the long, quiet hallway to the examination room. I hoisted myself onto the padded exam table, leaning back against the crinkling paper. Dr. Richmond entered a few moments later, offering a warm, professional smile. She dimmed the overhead lights and squeezed a generous amount of clear, freezing gel onto my bare stomach. The cold sensation made me shiver. Dr. Richmond pressed the transducer wand against my skin, moving it in slow, deliberate arcs. The monitor on the wall flickered to life, displaying a grainy black-and-white landscape of shadows and curves. A moment later, a rapid, rhythmic whoosh-whoosh sound filled the small room. "That is a strong, healthy heartbeat," Dr. Richmond said, pointing to a pulsating flutter on the screen. "The fluid levels look excellent, and the cardiac chambers are developing perfectly. You are doing a wonderful job, Vivian." I stared at the monitor. The sound of that rapid heartbeat echoed in the tight space. It was the sound of my child, innocent and entirely dependent on me for survival. A profound, fierce protective instinct surged through my veins, overshadowing the grief of my ruined marriage. Julian threatened to take this child away from me. He threatened to lock me in a monitored room and strip me of my motherhood to protect his corporate reputation and his young mistress. Tears pricked the back of my eyes, a natural biological response to the overwhelming convergence of creating life and facing total destruction. But I stared straight up at the perforated ceiling tiles, counting the small holes one by one, forcing the moisture back down. I did not shed a single tear in front of Dr. Richmond. I could not afford to show any sign of emotional fragility. Julian was building a narrative that I was mentally unstable. I knew that medical records could be subpoenaed in a custody battle. I needed my chart to reflect a calm, rational, and perfectly healthy mother. "I will print a few extra copies of the sonogram for your husband," Dr. Richmond offered, wiping the gel from my stomach with a warm towel. "It is a shame he had to miss such a great checkup." "Thank you," I replied, my voice steady and light. "He is very dedicated to his work right now." I left the clinic holding a glossy strip of ultrasound photos. I walked to the parking garage, the crisp morning air biting at my cheeks. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, locked the doors, and pulled out my phone. The time for silent endurance was over. I needed a strategist who understood the ruthless mechanics of corporate warfare. I dialed my brother-in-law. Marcus answered on the second ring. His voice was sharp, deep, and devoid of unnecessary pleasantries. "Vivian, tell me you are safe." "I am safe," I said, resting my forehead against the steering wheel. But Julian took the maternity fund, all $80,000. He wired it to a shell company registered to Sienna Brooks. The silence on the other end of the line was brief but loaded. When Marcus spoke again, the protective brother-in-law vanished, replaced entirely by the lethal corporate attorney who dismantled hostile takeovers for a living. "Do you have the transaction ledgers?" I secured the digital footprint before he locked me out of the portal, I confirmed. He also forced me to sign a non-disclosure agreement this morning under duress. He threatened to use the legal team at his insurance firm to have me committed for prenatal psychosis and take full custody of the baby if I exposed the affair. He is building a paper trail to brand me as an unfit mother. Marcus let out a low, dark chuckle that sent a shiver of anticipation down my spine. Julian is playing a very dangerous game. He thinks he is a clever financial director swatting away a domestic dispute. He does not realize he just handed us the keys to his destruction. If he moved joint funds into a hidden LLC to finance a subordinate, he crossed the line from marital infidelity into financial misconduct. If any of those funds mingled with his corporate accounts or client retainers, he committed wire fraud. He sent me an anonymous photo this morning. I continued detailing the Aspen trip, the stolen jacket, and the text message. He is trying to break my psychological endurance. He wants me to act erratic. He wants me to strike out so he can point a finger and call me crazy. Then we give him exactly what he expects from a subdued wife, Marcus advised, his tone shifting into tactical command. You play the part of the compliant, exhausted pregnant woman. You let him think his little gag order worked. You let him feel powerful. Meanwhile, you send me the LLC registration numbers and the wire transfer logs. I will use my firm's investigative resources to pull the beneficial ownership records. We are going to track every cent he moved over the past 2 years. I will send the encrypted files to your secure server tonight. I said, a cold sense of purpose settling over my racing heart. Vivian, Marcus added, his voice softening just a fraction. You are dealing with a man who has no moral floor. He will try to invade your sanctuary to prove his dominance. Protect your space. Do not let him control your reality. I hung up the phone and looked at the sonogram picture resting on the passenger seat. The rhythmic sound of the heartbeat still echoed in my memory. I started the engine and drove out of the parking garage, my mind mapping out the architecture of a trap. Julian thought he could strip me of my money, my sanity, and my child. He was about to learn what happens when a forensic auditor turns her own life into a crime scene. I drove back toward the house, preparing to smile through the pain, unaware that Julian was already staging his next act of psychological warfare right in the middle of my sanctuary. The drive back from the clinic felt like navigating through a thick fog. My physical exhaustion was setting in my body, heavy with the late-stage pregnancy, but my mind raced with Marcus's instructions. Play the compliant wife. Let him feel powerful. I pulled into the driveway of our sprawling Buckhead home, the manicured lawn and grand brick facade looking like a cruel mockery of the turmoil brewing inside. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the quiet foyer, dropping my keys into the ceramic bowl. I headed straight upstairs to the master suite, craving the simple comfort of a hot shower to wash away the lingering chill of the ultrasound gel and the toxic stress of the morning. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the ensuite bathroom and stopped dead in my tracks. The scent hit me first. It was a potent, lingering cloud of the same limited edition Tom Ford perfume Sienna wore when she crashed my baby shower. It hung heavily in the steam-filled air, a pungent reminder of the betrayal. I stepped further into the bathroom, my eyes scanning the pristine white marble countertops. Resting deliberately next to my toothbrush holder was a tube of bright crimson lipstick, uncapped and slightly smudged around the edges. Draped carelessly over the edge of the double vanity sink was a silk scarf patterned with vibrant, garish colors. I did not own a single item in that shade of red, nor did I wear silk scarves. My stomach churned, a sudden wave of bile rising in my throat. Julian was not just careless. He was intentionally marking his territory. He brought his 25-year-old mistress into our home, into our master bathroom, while I was lying on an exam table listening to our child's heartbeat. He was turning my safe haven into a psychological battleground, leaving breadcrumbs of his infidelity right in front of my face. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to scream, to shatter the bathroom mirrors, to tear the silk scarf to shreds, and to call him in a frantic, unhinged rage. He was baiting a trap, hoping I would provide him with the exact manic behavior he needed to validate his narrative of my impending mental breakdown. I took a slow, deep breath, inhaling the sickening scent of the perfume, and let it out through my teeth. I pulled out my phone and dialed Julian's private office line. It rang 3 times before he picked up. "Julian here," he answered, his tone brisk and professional. The voice of a busy executive interrupted during an important task. "I am home from the ultrasound," I said, keeping my voice soft, injecting a slight trembling vulnerability into my words. "The baby is healthy. The heartbeat is strong." "That is good news, Vivian," he replied, dismissing the life-altering update with the same casual indifference one might use to acknowledge a weather report. "I told you everything would be fine if you just relaxed. Was there something else? I am reviewing quarterly projections, and I am quite busy." I walked over to the vanity and stared at the crimson lipstick. "Julian, there is a strange lipstick and a silk scarf on the bathroom counter. The room smells like perfume. Was someone here?" A low, patronizing chuckle echoed through the phone speaker. It was the sound of a predator enjoying the confusion of his prey. You really need to stop this, Vivian. The cleaning service was there earlier this morning. The maid probably left her things behind by mistake. Are you forgetting to take your prenatal vitamins again? You are starting to sound delusional. I cannot have my wife acting like a paranoid schizophrenic every time she finds a misplaced item in the house. Please take a nap and calm down. I will see you at dinner. The line went dead. He hung up on me. I lowered the phone from my ear, staring at the blank screen. The maid service came on Thursdays. Today was Tuesday. He did not even bother crafting a plausible lie. He delivered the insult with a smirk I could hear through the phone, confident that his psychological warfare was breaking my spirit. He wanted to gaslight me into questioning my own reality, forcing me to doubt the evidence sitting right in front of my eyes. I did not smash the lipstick into the mirror. I did not throw the silk scarf into the trash can. I left them exactly where they were, untouched, perfectly preserved artifacts of his arrogance. I walked out of the bathroom, closing the door quietly behind me. The urge to destroy something was overwhelming, a primal instinct demanding release. But an auditor knows that destroying evidence only benefits the guilty party. If Julian wanted to turn our home into a stage for his deceit, I would gladly supply the lighting and the cameras. By noon, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a trusted, discreet locksmith I had used during complex corporate audits to secure compromised server rooms. He arrived within the hour in an unmarked van. I directed him to my private home office on the main floor. He replaced the standard brass lock with a high-security biometric deadbolt that required my specific fingerprint to open. It cost a premium, but securing my physical workspace and the encrypted hard drives containing Julian's financial records was non-negotiable. The second call was to a private security technician recommended by Marcus. He was a quiet, efficient man who asked no questions and worked with the speed of someone accustomed to handling high-stakes domestic disputes. He arrived shortly after the locksmith departed. I need total surveillance of the primary entry points and the common areas I instructed him, standing in the center of the expansive living room. The cameras must be completely undetectable. If my husband spots a single lens, the installation is compromised. The technician nodded, pulling a set of microlenses from his heavy black equipment case. I will integrate them into the existing smart home infrastructure. They will run on a separate encrypted cellular network. Even if he monitors the home Wi-Fi traffic, he will never see the data stream. I watched as he systematically wired the house for surveillance. He installed a pinhole camera inside the casing of the digital thermostat in the main hallway, providing a clear, unobstructed view of the front door and the staircase leading to the master suite. He placed a second micro camera behind the speaker grill of the surround sound system in the living room, capturing the entire seating area and the entrance to the kitchen. The third camera went into the decorative crown molding above the fireplace, directly facing the spot where I had collapsed during my panic attack the day before. The installation took less than 3 hours. Before he left, the technician handed me a secure encrypted tablet paired exclusively with the hidden cameras. You have 4K resolution low-light capability and full audio recording. He explained, demonstrating the interface. The footage uploads directly to a secure cloud server managed by your brother-in-law's firm. If the cameras are discovered or physically destroyed, the data is already safely stored off-site. I thanked him and paid his invoice in cash, ensuring no electronic record of the transaction existed on any of Julian's monitored accounts. I sat alone in my newly secured home office, the heavy biometric deadbolt locked firmly behind me. I opened the encrypted tablet and brought up the live feeds. The screens displayed crystal-clear, wide-angle views of my home. The silence in the house was no longer a symbol of my isolation. It was the quiet anticipation of a trap waiting to be sprung. Julian believed he was the master manipulator, moving chess pieces across a board while I stumbled blindly in the dark. He thought bringing his mistress into our home was the ultimate display of his dominance, a cruel strategy to drive me into a frenzy. He did not realize that his arrogance had blinded him to the simplest rule of engagement. When you invite the enemy into your sanctuary, you surrender the element of surprise. I placed the tablet on my desk, next to the thick printed file containing the wire transfer logs Marcus had instructed me to secure. The foundation of Julian's destruction was solidifying. I leaned back in my chair, pressing a hand against my stomach, feeling a strong, reassuring kick from the baby. I was no longer a frantic, terrified wife pleading for her husband's loyalty. I was the architect of his downfall, and the cameras were rolling. The encrypted tablet sat on my desk, displaying the empty, silent rooms of my house. The trap was set, waiting for Julian to make his next careless move. I spent the remainder of the afternoon cross-referencing the wire transfer logs, building a meticulously organized digital dossier of Julian's financial infidelity. I was deeply engrossed in a spreadsheet when my personal cell phone buzzed. It was a secure line separate from the primary plan Julian monitored. I glanced at the caller ID. David Vance. David was a former colleague, a senior underwriter at a prominent Atlanta credit brokerage. We had worked together on several high-stakes corporate audits, tracing hidden liabilities during major mergers. He was meticulous, discreet, and he owed me a significant professional favor for uncovering a fraud ring that nearly cost him his license 3 years ago. I picked up the phone. Vivian speaking. "Vivian, I need to talk to you." David's voice was hushed, lacking his usual booming confidence. The background noise sounded like he was calling from a stairwell or a private parking garage. I am looking at a file that just crossed my desk, and my gut is screaming that something is fundamentally wrong. My pulse quickened, the familiar adrenaline rush of an impending audit kicking in. "What kind of file, David?" "A second mortgage application," he replied, his tone grim. "A substantial cash-out refinance on your primary residence in Buckhead. $2.4 million. The application was submitted through a digital portal early this morning. The underwriting is being fast-tracked for an emergency disbursement by the end of the week." I gripped the edge of my desk, my knuckles turning white. The Buckhead house. The sprawling brick estate with the manicured lawn and the custom nursery. I bought that house with my own money 2 years before I even met Julian. The deed was solely in my name. Julian had aggressively lobbied to be added to the title after we married, arguing it was a symbol of our united front. But my ingrained financial caution had kept me from filing the amendment. It was my only remaining uncompromised asset. "Julian cannot take out a second mortgage on that property," I stated, my voice sharp and precise. "He is not on the deed. The bank would require my direct authorization and a notarized signature." "That is exactly why I'm calling you," David said, the tension in his voice escalating. "The application packet includes a fully executed electronic power of attorney and a digital consent form transferring leveraging rights to Julian. The e-signatures perfectly match your verified signature on file. The authentication logs show the documents were signed from your IP address late last night." The air in my home office grew thin. The realization slammed into me with the force of a freight train. Last night, when I was collapsed on the kitchen floor, paralyzed by a panic attack, Julian was not just storming out to comfort his mistress. He had used my compromised state as a distraction. He accessed my personal laptop, likely using a keylogger he had installed weeks ago, bypassed my security protocols, and digitally forged my signature on a massive loan application. I was not just draining the cash accounts. He was liquidating my equity. He planned to extract $2.4 million in cash, funnel it into his hidden shell companies, and disappear with Sienna, leaving me heavily pregnant, financially ruined, and holding the bag on a massive fraudulent debt. He was orchestrating an execution of my entire financial existence. "How much time do I have before the funds are released?" I demanded, my mind racing through the variables, calculating the exact window for intervention. "The application is flagged for priority processing," David warned. Julian cited a lucrative, time-sensitive venture capital opportunity as the reason for the rush. Given his executive profile and the pristine equity in the property, the automated underwriting system cleared the initial hurdles. If this goes to the final funding queue, the cash could hit his receiving account within 48 hours. "If I report this to the police right now as fraud, what happens?" I asked, testing the immediate legal option. David let out a heavy sigh. "If you file a police report, Julian will be tipped off immediately. He will claim it is a marital misunderstanding or blame a technical error. More importantly, the moment he realizes the loan is compromised, he will panic. He will likely liquidate whatever remaining joint assets you have and wire the funds offshore before the authorities can freeze his accounts. You cannot risk spooking him until you have a lock on all his escape routes." David was right. A premature police report would alert the prey before the net was fully closed. Julian would scorch the earth and vanish, leaving me fighting a messy, prolonged legal battle to prove the forgery while drowning in debt. I needed to paralyze the loan from the inside quietly, without triggering a single alarm in Julian's carefully constructed plan. Do not flag the application in the system, David. I instructed, my voice dropping to a low, commanding register. Do not pause the underwriting. Let it proceed normally on your end. I will handle the intervention through legal channels. I owe you for this. You owe me nothing, Vivian, he replied earnestly. Just protect yourself. He is moving fast. I ended the call and immediately dialed Marcus. He answered on the first ring. We have a massive escalation, I said, skipping the pleasantries. Julian forged a digital power of attorney using my IP address last night. He is executing a $2.4 million cash-out refinance on the Buckhead house. The application is fast-tracked. He is trying to extract the equity and run before the baby is born. We have less than 48 hours before the funds clear. I heard Marcus curse softly, a rare break in his usually unflappable demeanor. The sheer audacity of the move was staggering even for a seasoned corporate lawyer. The arrogance is blinding him. Marcus muttered, his tone shifting into tactical mode. He is committing federal bank fraud using electronic signatures. That elevates this from a messy divorce into a serious criminal offense. I cannot go to the authorities yet, Marcus, I urged. If Julian senses an investigation, he will burn the accounts and move the cash offshore. We need to freeze the loan application internally and visibly so he thinks it is still processing. Understood, Marcus replied, the sharp edge of his legal acumen cutting through the crisis. My firm represents the parent company of the brokerage Julian is using. I will not file a public injunction. I will contact the chief risk officer directly under the guise of an internal compliance audit. I will inform them that the title on the property is currently under a quiet, active legal dispute, and any disbursement of funds carries a severe liability risk for the bank. They will place a shadow hold on the file. The loan officer will see the application as pending final review indefinitely. Julian will not receive a rejection notice. He will just be told the compliance department needs a few extra days for standard verification. It will buy us the time we need, I said, feeling a fractional release of the crushing pressure in my chest. Vivian, Marcus warned, his voice turning deadly serious. Julian is accelerating his timeline. A man does not attempt to liquidate $2 million in a rushed refinance unless he is planning an immediate exit. He is preparing to pull the ripcord. You are standing in the blast zone. You need to be incredibly careful. If he realizes the money is not coming, his desperation will make him dangerous. I have the cameras installed, I assured him. He thinks I am subdued. He thinks his non-disclosure agreement silenced me. I will keep playing the role of the compliant, exhausted wife until we drop the hammer. Keep your head down, Vivian, Marcus ordered. I will handle the bank. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The sheer scale of Julian's deception was breathtaking. He was not just a cheating husband. He was a financial predator systematically dismantling my life while hiding behind the veneer of a loving partnership. He wanted to leave me destitute, holding a baby and a fraudulent mortgage, while he funded a new life with his mistress. I opened the encrypted dossier on my computer, added a new section labeled Bank Fraud, Forged POA, and began drafting the detailed timeline of the loan application. I was no longer just preparing for a divorce settlement. I was compiling a federal indictment. Julian thought he was executing a flawless financial extraction. He did not realize he was just handing me the rope I would use to hang him. The very next morning, the trap Julian laid began to snap shut, not with a loud confrontation, but with a sterile calendar invite. I was sitting in my home office reviewing a complex offshore tax structure for a client when a notification popped up on my screen. My firm's managing partner, Mr. Harrison, requested an immediate virtual meeting. The subject line read, "Confidential Personnel Matter." I clicked the link expecting a routine discussion about reassigning my workload ahead of my upcoming delivery date. Instead, the video conference loaded to reveal Mr. Harrison sitting next to the head of human resources. Neither offered their usual warm greeting. Their faces bore the tight, uncomfortable expressions of corporate risk managers bracing for a liability disaster. Vivian, Mr. Harrison began, his tone heavy with manufactured pity. We received a highly concerning phone call this morning. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A phone call from whom the HR director leaned forward, clasping her hands on the desk. Your husband reached out to us. He sounded heartbroken, Vivian. He informed us about your recent diagnosis. He detailed the severe prenatal psychosis you are currently battling. He mentioned a severe outburst at a social gathering this weekend involving physical altercations with innocent guests. My breath caught in my throat. Julian had not just spun a lie to protect his affair. He weaponized my pregnancy to orchestrate a clinical assassination of my character. He knew my firm handled highly sensitive corporate financial data. A forensic accountant experiencing a severe psychotic break and exhibiting unstable behavior was a walking liability to the firm's reputation. "I am perfectly healthy," I stated, keeping my voice level and my posture rigid. "My husband is attempting to create a false narrative due to a private domestic dispute. I have no medical diagnosis of any psychosis. I can provide a full psychiatric evaluation by the end of the day to clear my record." Mr. Harrison offered a slow, tragic shake of his head. The exact response a rational person expects when dealing with someone who has lost their grip on reality. "Denial is the most common symptom of these episodes, Vivian. Julian warned us you might try to mask the severity of your condition. We cannot risk our clients' data integrity, nor can we allow you to subject yourself to the high-stress environment of forensic auditing while your mental health is fracturing." Effective immediately, the HR director added, cutting off my rebuttal, "We are placing you on involuntary unpaid medical leave until after the baby is born, and you can provide a sustained record of psychiatric clearance. Your system access will be restricted in 5 minutes. We just want you to get the help you need." The screen went black. The meeting ended. A second later, my corporate email refreshed and displayed an error message. Julian severed my income and stripped away my professional credibility in a single calculated phone call. I knew unpaid leave would drain my remaining personal reserves, tightening his financial stranglehold. The professional execution was just the opening maneuver. Julian's smear campaign extended far beyond my career, infecting every corner of my social existence. I picked up my phone to call Emily, my closest friend in our Buckhead social circle, someone who had attended the ruined baby shower. I needed an ally. I needed someone to validate my sanity. The line rang 4 times. When Emily finally answered, her voice lacked its usual bright cadence. She spoke in slow, measured syllables, treating me like a fragile glass sculpture teetering on the edge of a table. "Vivian," she breathed out, her tone dripping with a suffocating, patronizing sympathy. "Are you feeling okay today? Julian called us last night. He was crying, Vivian. He told us everything." "What exactly did he tell you?" I asked, gripping the edge of my desk so tight my knuckles ached. "He explained the prenatal psychosis," Emily whispered, as if the very words might trigger an episode. "He explained how the hormonal imbalance is making you hallucinate affairs and see enemies everywhere. He apologized to everyone for the scene at the shower. He is trying so hard to protect you, Vivian. He begged us to be patient and to give you space while he seeks inpatient treatment options for you." I felt a cold sweat break out across my neck. "Sienna walked into my home and taunted me," I said, maintaining a strict, quiet logic. "She wore a perfume Julian purchased. She wore a coat I bought for him. He is funneling our money into her bank accounts. He is lying to you to cover his tracks." "Oh, sweetie." Emily sighed, the sound echoing with tragic disbelief. "Julian warned us you would build these elaborate conspiracies to justify the paranoia. You need to stop auditing your own marriage and focus on getting professional help. We love you, but we cannot engage in these delusions. Please just listen to your husband. He is doing everything he can to hold your family together." The call ended. I lowered the phone, staring at the blank screen. Julian engineered a masterpiece of psychological warfare. He painted himself as the long-suffering, devoted husband enduring unimaginable domestic tragedy. By striking first, he inoculated our entire social circle against the truth. Any attempt I made to expose his infidelity, any financial proof I brought forward, would be dismissed as the manic ravings of a sick, paranoid woman. The more I fought back, the crazier I would look. I was trapped in a glass box. I could see the truth clearly, but no one on the outside could hear my voice. The injustice of being a sane woman suffocating under a fabricated mental illness felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I was entirely isolated. My friends looked at me with pity. My employers looked at me with fear. At 6 p.m, the front door opened. Julian returned home. I sat in the living room reading a novel, forcing my heart rate to remain steady. Our housekeeper, Maria, was finishing her shift in the kitchen, wiping down the marble countertops. Julian walked into the room carrying a large bouquet of white lilies and a takeout bag from my favorite Italian restaurant. His performance was flawless. He spotted Maria, and his entire demeanor softened into the weary, loving caretaker. He walked over to the sofa, knelt in front of me, and placed a gentle hand over mine. "How are you feeling today, my love?" Julian asked, his voice adopting a hushed, tender cadence designed to echo through the open floor plan. "Did you manage to get some rest? I brought your favorite pasta. We just need to take it one day at a time." Maria paused her wiping, looking at Julian with eyes full of sorrowful admiration. She saw a saint tending to a broken woman. I looked into Julian's eyes. Beneath the mask of the devoted husband, his pupils danced with a chilling, triumphant mockery. How was daring me to react? He wanted me to throw the hot pasta at the wall. He wanted me to slap the lilies out of his hands. He needed a witness to my supposed insanity. "Thank you, Julian," I replied, offering a hollow, compliant smile. "That is very thoughtful of you." Maria smiled softly, gathered her belongings, and exited through the side door, leaving us alone in the quiet house. The moment the lock clicked shut behind the housekeeper, Julian's tender expression evaporated. He dropped my hand, stood up, and casually tossed the bouquet of lilies onto the coffee table. He walked over to the built-in bar, poured himself a glass of expensive bourbon, and took a slow, satisfied sip. "You see how easy that was?" Julian taunted, leaning against the bar, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. "One phone call to your boss. A few emotional conversations with our friends. Everyone is deeply concerned for your fragile mental state, Vivian. They all think you are a ticking time bomb." I remained seated, keeping my breathing shallow and even. "You are a sociopath. I am a strategist," he corrected, flashing a wolfish grin. "I recognized a threat to my reputation, and I neutralized it. By the time I file the divorce papers, the narrative will be set in stone. A judge will look at a woman who lost her job due to erratic behavior, a woman whose own friends refuse to take her calls, and they will hand me full custody of my child without a second thought. You have no money coming in. You have no allies. You have no credibility. You are a ghost in your own life." The psychological suffocation he inflicted was masterful. He dismantled my identity and replaced it with a caricature of madness. He expected me to break under the sheer isolating weight of the injustice. He wanted me to spiral into the exact despair he sold to the public. But as Julian stood there boasting about his flawless execution and sipping his bourbon, my eyes flicked ever so slightly toward the crown molding above the fireplace. The micro-camera Marcus's technician installed the day before captured every word, every smirk, and every drop of his manufactured facade. The lens recorded the chilling transition from the fake devoted husband into the calculating predator. I did not scream. I did not argue. I absorbed the agonizing unfairness of the moment, letting his arrogance fuel my endurance. I lowered my head, feigning a defeated, broken posture. I allowed him to savor his victory, knowing that the digital server miles away was currently compiling the exact footage required to destroy his entire defense. Julian believed he locked me in a cage of public opinion. He did not realize I was the one holding the key. The humid Georgia afternoon felt unusually oppressive. I sat in the living room mechanically reviewing the wire transfer logs on my encrypted tablet, keeping a diligent watch on the hidden camera feeds. My forced medical leave left the house quiet. A suffocating silence. I used to meticulously build the federal case against Julian. The sudden sharp chime of the front doorbell shattered my concentration. I checked the security feed on my tablet. 3 figures stood on the front porch: Julian, his mother Beatrice, and a man I did not recognize. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit and carried a scuffed leather briefcase, his eyes darting nervously around the manicured neighborhood. This was not a social visit. This was an escalation. I closed the tablet, slid it under the sofa cushion, and walked to the foyer. The moment I turned the deadbolt, Julian pushed the heavy oak door open, forcing me to take a step back to avoid being hit. He marched into the house with the swagger of a conquering general. Beatrice followed close behind, her nose wrinkled, as if the very air inside my home offended her. The stranger trailed them, clutching his briefcase against his chest. "What is the meaning of this?" I demanded, my voice tight but controlled, refusing to yield the space in my own hallway. Julian did not answer. He bypassed me and walked straight into the living room, gesturing for the stranger to follow. The man unclasped his briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of legal documents stamped with a red seal, and tossed them onto the glass coffee table. "This is an emergency medical injunction," Julian announced, his tone dripping with fake sorrow, while his eyes gleamed with malice. "I petitioned the court this morning. Given your escalating erratic behavior and the severe risk your untreated prenatal psychosis poses to our unborn child, a judge signed off on an immediate intervention." My blood ran cold. I stared at the stack of papers resting on the table. Beatrice stepped forward, resting a manicured hand on her son's shoulder, playing the role of the tragic supportive matriarch to perfection. "We found a wonderful private psychiatric care facility in North Georgia." Beatrice cooed, her voice laced with venomous pity. "They specialize in postpartum recovery and severe hormonal imbalances. You will have a comfortable room round-the-clock monitoring, and you will not be a danger to yourself or the baby. We packed a bag for you. The transport car is waiting outside. They were executing a daytime kidnapping wrapped in legal jargon. Julian planned to drag me out of my own home, lock me in an unregulated psychiatric ward, and claim full control of the property and my child. He needed me physically removed before the fake second mortgage funds cleared. If I was locked in a facility, I could not contest the fraudulent loan or stop him from emptying the accounts. "I am not leaving this house," I stated, stepping between them and the front door. "This is my property. I have no medical diagnosis. You are attempting an illegal eviction." The stranger in the cheap suit finally spoke up, clearing his throat nervously. "Ma'am, I am Arthur Vance, representing your husband. The injunction is legally binding. If you refuse to comply voluntarily, we are authorized to contact local law enforcement to assist in a mandatory medical extraction. It would be highly traumatic for the baby if the police had to physically restrain you. We strongly advise you to come quietly." I looked at Julian. He was enjoying every second of this. He believed he cornered me. He believed his smear campaign worked so well that no police officer would question a husband removing his hysterical pregnant wife for her own safety. The sheer audacity of the ambush stole the breath from my lungs. The room began to spin. A sharp, localized pain flared in my lower abdomen, a warning sign from my overstressed body, but I forced my spine to remain straight. I reached for my phone on the side table, but Julian snatched it away before my fingers could make contact. "You do not need to make any calls, Vivian," he said, slipping the phone to his jacket pocket. "We are handling everything." The heavy thud of a car door slamming shut echoed from the driveway. Heavy, rapid footsteps marched up the front porch. The front door, still slightly ajar from their aggressive entry, swung open wide. Marcus stepped into the foyer. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie perfectly aligned. He carried a sleek black leather portfolio. He did not look angry. He looked like an apex predator stepping into a cage with cornered mice. His gaze swept over Julian, lingered on Beatrice's shocked expression, and finally locked onto the nervous lawyer holding the briefcase. Marcus walked into the living room, the sheer force of his presence sucking the oxygen out of the space. He stopped in front of the coffee table, picked up the supposed injunction, and scanned the first page. He let out a low, dark chuckle that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Arthur Vance." Marcus read the name of the lawyer aloud, his deep voice resonating with lethal calm. "I recognize that name. You run a low-rent domestic dispute practice out of a strip mall in Marietta. You handle messy divorces and aggressive custody grabs for desperate men." Julian stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Marcus, this is a private family matter. Vivian is unwell. We have a court order for her removal. Step aside." Marcus ignored Julian completely. He kept his eyes fixed on Arthur Vance. "You filed an ex parte emergency motion this morning in Fulton County based entirely on a husband's unverified affidavit. You did not submit a single psychiatric evaluation from a licensed medical professional. You did not serve notice to the opposing party. And worse," Marcus continued, his voice dropping an octave, "you are attempting to execute an eviction on a property solely deeded in the wife's name, using a medical injunction as a bypass for a legal eviction process." Arthur Vance swallowed hard, taking a noticeable step backward. "Mr. Sterling, I assure you the paperwork is standard procedure for protective custody." "Standard procedure?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. He gripped the top corners of the injunction document. "Let me explain the standard procedure for a corporate defense attorney dealing with a fraudulent filing. Marcus ripped the heavy legal document in half. The sound of the tearing paper echoed sharply in the quiet room. Beatrice gasped, pressing a hand to her pearl necklace. Julian's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. Marcus dropped the torn pieces onto the glass table. "If you do not leave this property in exactly 30 seconds," Marcus stated, pointing a rigid finger at Arthur Vance, "I will personally file a grievance with the Georgia State Bar before close of business today. I will cite ethical violations regarding fraudulent ex parte filings, intimidation, and attempting an illegal eviction. I will drag your strip mall practice through a disciplinary hearing that will result in the immediate suspension of your license. You will not practice law in this state again. Do you understand me?" Arthur Vance did not hesitate. The cheap lawyer recognized the difference between bullying a terrified pregnant woman and facing a corporate shark capable of destroying his livelihood. He snapped his briefcase shut, turned on his heel, and scurried out the front door without looking back. Julian's confidence shattered. His hired gun just abandoned him. He stared at Marcus, his face flushing a deep, furious red. "You cannot do this!" Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "She is a danger to my child. I am her husband. You are a trespasser," Marcus corrected coldly. "This house belongs to Vivian. The locks were changed yesterday. You are no longer a resident here. If you do not follow your lawyer out that door right now, I will call the police and have you arrested for criminal trespassing and attempted kidnapping." Beatrice grabbed Julian's arm, her aristocratic composure entirely ruined. "Julian, let us go," she hissed, pulling him toward the door. "This animal is trying to bait you. We will handle this in court." Julian glared at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, venomous hatred. "This is not over, Vivian," he snarled. "I will take everything from you." The door slammed shut behind them. The sound of their tires screeching out of the driveway confirmed their retreat. The adrenaline that kept me upright through the confrontation evaporated in an instant. The crushing weight of the stress crashed down on me. The dull ache in my lower abdomen flared into a blinding, agonizing tear. I cried out, doubling over and gripping the edge of the sofa. A warm rush of fluid soaked through my maternity dress, pooling on the hardwood floor. Marcus dropped his portfolio and rushed to my side, catching my arm before I hit the ground. "Vivian." He called out, his calm demeanor replaced by sudden, sharp concern. My water broke. I gasped, the pain radiating through my spine, stealing the breath from my lungs. "The baby." "It is too early. I am only 34 weeks. I gripped Marcus's forearm, my nails digging into his expensive suit jacket. The physical agony of the premature labor mixed with the terrifying realization of Julian's ambush. I was going into a high-risk delivery in a state of total emotional exhaustion. Marcus hoisted me up, supporting my weight as we moved toward the door, leaving the torn pieces of the fake injunction resting on the coffee table as the first brutal contraction ripped through my body. The sterile, blinding lights of the emergency room ceiling passed overhead in a rapid, dizzying blur. The gurney wheels clattered violently against the linoleum floor. I gripped the cold metal side rails, squeezing my eyes shut as another contraction tore through my abdomen with merciless force. It was a jagged, searing agony that left me gasping for air. Marcus ran alongside the gurney, his large hand resting firmly on my shoulder. Lauren, my older sister, ran on the opposite side. Her face was streaked with fresh tears, her voice cracking as she barked medical history details to the trauma nurses flanking us. 34 weeks, severe maternal distress, sudden water break. She shouted, her protective instincts overriding her panic. The chaos of the emergency bay faded as they wheeled me through the heavy double doors into the surgical suite. The nurses moved with terrifying efficiency. They strapped monitors across my chest and wrapped a blood pressure cuff tightly around my arm. The steady, rhythmic beeping of the fetal heart monitor echoed through the small room, a fragile sound fighting against the overwhelming noise of the medical team. The doctor, a stern-faced woman in blue scrubs, leaned over me. "Vivian, the baby is in distress. The heart rate is dropping dangerously low due to the early rupture. We need to perform an emergency C-section right now." I nodded, unable to form words through the pain. As the anesthesiologist moved in to administer the epidural, I blindly reached out and grabbed Marcus's wrist. The corporate attorney froze, looking down at my pale, sweating face. The files I managed to choke out my voice, a ragged whisper. The wire logs, the fake injunction. "Do not let Julian near my house. Do not let him destroy the evidence." Marcus gripped my hand tightly. his dark eyes promising absolute devastation. I locked down the servers before I left the house, Vivian. The evidence is secure. You focus on surviving this. I will handle the predator. The anesthesia took effect rapidly, numbing the lower half of my body. A blue surgical drape was erected across my chest, blocking my view. The physical pain vanished, replaced by a terrifying, hollow tugging sensation as the surgical team worked rapidly. I stared at the ceiling, silently pleading for the life of the child I was bringing into this nightmare. Time distorted. I heard the sharp snap of surgical instruments and the low, urgent commands of the doctor. Then a thin, weak cry pierced the air. It was not a robust wail, but a frail, struggling whimper. A nurse rushed past my line of sight, carrying a tiny, purple-tinged bundle wrapped in a heated towel. "The baby is not breathing adequately," the doctor announced, her tone clinical and urgent. "Respiratory distress syndrome. We are moving him to the neonatal intensive care unit immediately for intubation." I tried to lift my head, desperate to see my son, but the medication weighed me down like lead. Lauren, dressed in sterile scrubs, pressed a cold washcloth to my forehead. She leaned down, tears spilling onto her surgical mask. "He is fighting, Vivian," she whispered fiercely. "He is fighting. You just rest." I slipped into the dark, exhausted void of the anesthesia, carrying the weak sound of my son's first cry into the silence. I woke up hours later in a private recovery room. The lingering effects of the medication left my limbs heavy and uncoordinated. The room was quiet, devoid of the frantic energy of the surgical bay. The dull throbbing of the incision site served as a grim reminder of the emergency delivery. I turned my head toward the door. Lauren was pacing near the window, her phone pressed tightly against her ear, arguing with someone in hushed, furious tones. She noticed me stirring and immediately ended the call, rushing to my bedside. "He is in the NICU," Vivian, Lauren said quickly, anticipating my first question. "They intubated him to help expand his lungs. The neonatologist says his vitals are stabilizing, but he needs to remain in the incubator for strict monitoring." I let out a long, shuddering breath, the tension releasing slightly from my chest. I need to see him. I tried to push myself up, but a sharp spike of pain forced me back against the pillows. "You cannot move yet," Lauren warned, gently pressing my shoulder down. "But there is a massive problem happening right outside this door." Before I could ask what she meant, the heavy wooden door to my recovery room swung open. Julian walked in. He looked immaculate. He wore a fresh navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and carried an enormous, expensive arrangement of pink and white peonies. The performance of the devoted, terrified father was flawless. He moved toward the bed with long, purposeful strides, his face arranged into a mask of deep, manufactured concern. "Vivian, my love," he breathed out, setting the flowers on the side table. He reached out to stroke my hair. I came as soon as the hospital called. I was beside myself with worry. I turned my head sharply, avoiding his touch. The scent of his expensive cologne made my stomach turn. "Where were you when your lawyer tried to drag me out of my home?" I asked, my voice hoarse and raspy. Julian ignored the question entirely. He looked at Lauren, his expression hardening into a cold, dismissive glare. "Lauren, I need a moment alone with my wife. You can wait in the lobby." "I am not going anywhere," Julian, Lauren snapped, crossing her arms defensively. "You do not get to storm in here after what you did this morning and bark orders." Julian did not argue. He simply stepped back, reached into his jacket pocket, and pulled out his cell phone. He dialed a number, keeping his eyes locked on my sister. "Yes, security. This is Julian, Vivian's husband. There is a disruptive individual in my wife's recovery room, refusing to leave. She is causing severe emotional distress to the patient. I need her escorted off the maternity ward immediately." He hung up the phone and offered a chilling, triumphant smirk. "I am her legal next of kin. I hold all medical proxy rights. You have zero authority on this floor." 2 large hospital security guards arrived less than a minute later. Julian pointed at Lauren, adopting the persona of a weary, protective husband. "She is agitating my wife. Please remove her." Lauren looked at me, her eyes wide with shock and fury. "Vivian, I am not leaving you alone with him." "Go, Lauren," I whispered, knowing that causing a scene would only validate Julian's narrative of an unstable family environment. "Go find Marcus. Make sure the files are safe." The guards escorted a protesting Lauren out of the room, leaving me entirely isolated with the man trying to destroy my life. The door clicked shut. The quiet hum of the hospital monitors filled the silence. Julian pulled a chair to the side of the bed and sat down, crossing his legs casually. He adjusted his cuffs, completely unbothered by the fact that our newborn son was fighting for his life down the hall in a plastic box. "I saw the baby in the NICU on my way up here," Julian said, his tone devoid of any paternal warmth. "He is quite small. It is a tragedy you could not carry him to term, Vivian. The stress of your mental breakdown clearly took a severe toll on your body." He was laying the groundwork. He was establishing the narrative that my supposed psychiatric episode caused the premature birth. He planned to use my emergency C-section against me in custody court. I stared at the ceiling, refusing to look at him. "Get out." Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bed rail. "I am not going anywhere. I am the loving father holding a vigil at the hospital." In fact, he paused, a cruel smile stretching across his face. "Sienna is downstairs in the main lobby right now. She brought coffee for the nursing staff. She is terribly worried about my well-being during this difficult time. She is proving to be a very supportive colleague." My heart hammered against my ribs. The sheer audacity of bringing his mistress to the hospital where I just delivered his premature son was breathtaking. He wanted to break me. He wanted me to scream, to pull out my IV lines, and to attack him. He wanted the nurses to rush in and find a hysterical, violent woman attacking her devoted husband. He wanted to prove his fake injunction was necessary. I closed my eyes, forcing my breathing to remain steady. I channeled the cold, detached focus I used during intense forensic audits. Julian thought he isolated me. He thought establishing his medical proxy rights meant he won the war. He did not realize that while he was busy playing the devoted father for the hospital staff, Marcus was miles away, cracking open the digital vault containing the true source of Julian's hidden wealth. Julian was gloating over a temporary victory, completely blind to the federal indictment hurtling toward him. The following afternoon, I finally received clearance to visit the neonatal intensive care unit. The journey down the sterile, brightly lit corridor felt agonizingly slow. I sat in a standard hospital wheelchair, pushed by a quiet, efficient nurse. My body ached with a dull, throbbing intensity from the emergency surgery, but the physical pain was secondary to the crushing anxiety gripping my chest. Julian had spent the last 24 hours parading around the maternity ward. He charmed the nursing staff, brought expensive pastries to the break room, and played the role of the exhausted, devoted father to absolute perfection. He successfully barred Lauren from the floor and severely restricted Marcus's visitation, claiming the presence of my family agitated my fragile mental state. He cornered me, using his status as my legal proxy to dictate who could and could not access my room. The nurse pushed my wheelchair through the heavy double doors of the NICU. The atmosphere inside changed instantly. The air was warm and smelled faintly of antiseptic. The room was dominated by the rhythmic, synchronized beeping of dozens of monitors. We navigated through the maze of incubators until we reached isolette 14. I looked through the clear plastic casing. My son lay there, impossibly small, hooked up to a terrifying array of wires and tubes. A tiny CPAP machine assisted his breathing, his chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow bursts. He wore a miniature blue knit cap to retain heat. I reached my hand through the small circular porthole on the side of the incubator and gently rested my index finger against his fragile, translucent palm. His tiny fingers reflexively curled around my nail. A fresh wave of tears blurred my vision. I was a mother fiercely determined to protect her child, yet I was trapped in a hospital bed by a man intent on destroying our future. Julian stood on the opposite side of the incubator, arms crossed, watching me with a detached, analytical gaze. He did not look at our son. He looked at me, assessing my weakness. The nurse checked the monitors, noted the stable vitals on a clipboard, and quietly excused herself, leaving us alone in the corner of the crowded room. "He looks fragile," Julian murmured, his voice lacking any genuine emotion. "It is a pity your body could not handle the stress of the pregnancy. I spoke with my legal counsel this morning. We are preparing the necessary filings. Once you are discharged, we will proceed with a formal psychiatric evaluation. It is best for the child if I assume primary physical custody until you are deemed stable." I was announcing his intention to take my son right in front of the incubator, keeping him alive. He wanted to strip away my last shred of hope. I kept my eyes fixed on the baby, refusing to give Julian the satisfaction of seeing my fear. "I will not let you take him," I whispered, my voice trembling but defiant. Julian let out a low, patronizing chuckle. "You do not have a choice, Vivian. You have no income, no access to our accounts, and a documented history of erratic behavior. Your own boss forced you on medical leave. I have a team of the best family law attorneys in Atlanta drafting the petition right now." Julian checked his luxury watch, a piece I recognized as a new acquisition. "I need to step out and take a call from my lead counsel. Do not cause a scene while I am gone." He turned on his heel and walked out of the NICU, the heavy doors swishing shut behind him. I sat alone by the incubator, the rhythmic beeping of the machines, the only sound in the suffocating silence. The reality of my situation pressed down on me. Julian held all the cards. He controlled the narrative, the finances, and the legal leverage. I needed a miracle, or I needed Marcus. 10 minutes later, the side door of the NICU, a restricted entrance designated strictly for attending medical staff, clicked open. A tall figure in a dark suit slipped through the gap, bypassing the main security desk entirely. It was Marcus. He moved with the stealth of a shadow, his polished leather shoes making no sound against the linoleum floor. He carried a nondescript manila folder tucked tightly under his arm. He spotted me and quickly crossed the room, pulling a small stool beside my wheelchair. "How did you get past security?" I breathed out, my heart racing. "Julian instructed the front desk to deny you entry." Marcus offered a tight, grim smile. "I am a senior partner at a firm that represents the primary medical supply vendor for this hospital network." A quick phone call to the hospital administrator bypassed Julian's petty restrictions. We do not have much time before he finishes his phone call. Marcus opened the manila folder and pulled out a small encrypted USB drive. He placed it discreetly on my lap. The corporate attorney demeanor vanished, replaced by the lethal, calculating focus of a man who just discovered the ultimate weakness in his opponent's armor. I pulled the beneficial ownership records for Vertex Horizon LLC, the shell company registered to Sienna Brooks. Marcus began, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "I traced the $80,000 Julian wired from your maternity fund. Did he use it to buy that Aspen trip?" I asked, the sting of the betrayal still fresh. Marcus shook his head, his eyes darkening. "The Aspen trip, the designer clothes, the new luxury watch he is wearing, those were not funded by your maternity savings, Vivian. The $80,000 from your account was merely the seed money required to formally incorporate the LLC and open the commercial banking lines without raising red flags." I frowned, my forensic auditor instincts kicking in despite my exhaustion. If he didn't spend the $80,000, what is Vertex Horizon actually doing? "It is a phantom vendor," Marcus stated, delivering the crushing blow. "Under the guise of providing specialized risk assessment consulting, Vertex Horizon has been issuing monthly invoices to the corporate insurance group, where Julian serves as financial director. Julian, utilizing his executive authority, has been personally approving those invoices for payment." The air in my lungs froze. The scale of the deception shifted rapidly from a domestic dispute into something far more sinister. "How much?" I asked, dreading the answer. Over the past 18 months, Julian has authorized the transfer of $2.2 million from his employer's corporate treasury directly into Sienna's shell company. Marcus revealed, tapping the USB drive on my lap. The funds are then laundered through a series of offshore accounts before routing back into a private trust controlled solely by Julian. I stared at Marcus, my mind struggling to process the magnitude of the crime. He is embezzling corporate funds. He is stealing millions from his own company. He is committing federal wire fraud. Marcus corrected, his tone razor sharp. He used the company servers to authorize the transfers crossing state lines with stolen corporate assets. And he used his mistress as the registered fall guy. If the audit triggers, Sienna's name is on all the incorporation documents. She is the managing director of the fraudulent vendor. Julian structured it so she takes the criminal liability while he controls the offshore trust. I looked through the plastic casing at my fragile newborn son. The man who fathered him was not just a narcissist or a cheating husband. He was a white-collar criminal orchestrating a massive multi-million-dollar federal offense. He planned to leave me destitute in family court while he sat on a stolen fortune, ready to burn his own mistress if the authorities ever caught a scent of the missing funds. "What is on this drive?" I asked, picking up the small metal device. Everything, Marcus said, his eyes blazing with a cold, righteous fury. The wire transfer logs, the fake invoices submitted by Vertex Horizon, the IP addresses linking the approvals directly to Julian's secure executive terminal, and the routing numbers for the offshore trust. I bypassed the standard legal discovery process and utilized my firm's private forensic investigators to secure the data. It is a complete, irrefutable federal indictment waiting for a signature. Julian thinks he trapped me, I whispered, a dark, unfamiliar sense of power blooming in my chest. I thinks he won because he locked me out of the joint checking account and spun a story about my mental health. Julian is playing checkers while standing in the middle of a minefield, Marcus replied smoothly. He does not realize the board of directors at his insurance group is currently initiating a routine third-quarter internal audit. If we drop this data anonymously to the lead auditor, Julian's career ends before the weekend. No, I countered instantly, the strategic vision clicking into place. If we leak this anonymously, Julian will panic. He will leverage his remaining executive power to shred the internal servers, throw Sienna under the bus, and flee the country with the offshore cash before the FBI can build a formal case. He will abandon this hospital, and I will be left fighting a ghost in family court while drowning in the fraudulent second mortgage debt he created. I looked at Marcus, my resolve hardening into steel. I want to control the demolition. I want him to feel safe. I want him to believe his plan worked perfectly right up until the moment the federal agents put the handcuffs on him in front of his entire executive board. Marcus leaned back slightly, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. You want to stage an ambush. I want to invite the executioners to a party he thinks he is hosting, I corrected. The heavy double doors of the NICU swung open. Julian strode back into the room, slipping his cell phone into his tailored jacket pocket. He looked immensely satisfied, completely unaware that his life was ticking down to a violent, unavoidable end. Marcus stood up smoothly, offering Julian a curt, professional nod. Julian stopped in his tracks, his smug expression twisting into an angry scowl. I told the front desk you were not permitted on this floor, Marcus, Julian hissed, stepping defensively between the incubator and my wheelchair. I was just leaving. Julian, Marcus replied easily, picking up his empty manila folder. I simply came to check on my nephew and offer my legal counsel to Vivian regarding her upcoming discharge papers. You have no business advising my wife, Julian warned, his tone aggressive and territorial. I will keep that in mind, Marcus said, turning toward the restricted exit. He offered me one last meaningful glance. Rest up, Vivian. You have a lot of planning to do. Marcus slipped out the door, leaving Julian seething in the center of the room. Julian turned his glare back to me. What did that arrogant lawyer say to you? I looked down at the encrypted USB drive hidden securely in the palm of my hand, shielded by the folds of my hospital gown. I looked up at the man who tried to destroy my sanity, steal my home, and rip my child from my arms. He just told me to focus on healing Julian, I said, forcing my voice to tremble, adopting the persona of the defeated, exhausted wife he expected to see. He told me I should listen to you and prioritize the baby's health over our disagreements. Julian's anger evaporated, replaced instantly by the arrogant satisfaction of a predator who believes he has fully broken his prey. He reached out and patted my shoulder, a condescending gesture of victory. That is the smartest thing your brother-in-law has ever said, Julian murmured, staring at our son in the incubator. We are going to put this ugly chapter behind us, Vivian. You just need to play your part. I gripped the USB drive tightly, feeling the sharp metal edges press into my skin. I will play my part perfectly. Julian, I promised, silently sealing his fate. I will give you the grandest stage you have ever seen. The plan required me to swallow my pride and wear the mask of a broken woman. Julian thrived on dominance, and to trap a narcissist, you must offer him the exact reflection of the power he craves. When I returned to my private recovery room later that evening, I sat on the edge of the hospital bed and forced my body into a posture of absolute defeat. I let my shoulders slump. I stared at the sterile white floor tiles until my eyes burned and watered. When the heavy wooden door clicked open, I did not look up. Julian walked in his leather shoes, tapping a confident rhythm against the linoleum. He paused at the foot of the bed, observing me. Vivian, he began, his voice carrying that practiced, weary tone of a long-suffering caregiver. The doctors say you can be discharged tomorrow. The baby will need to stay in the NICU for another week, but we need to discuss your transition home. I have the paperwork ready for the psychiatric evaluation facility." I let out a ragged, choked sob. I buried my face in my hands, allowing my shoulders to shake. It was the performance of a lifetime. I channeled the genuine terror I felt during the emergency delivery and the raw fury of discovering his embezzlement, twisting it all into a display of pathetic, desperate surrender. "Please, Julian," I cried, my voice muffled by my palms. "Please do not send me away. Do not take my baby." Julian stepped closer, his posture relaxing into a stance of smug superiority. "You left me no choice, Vivian. Your paranoia is out of control. You are a danger to our child's environment." I dropped my hands and looked up at him, my eyes wide and pleading. "I am just so overwhelmed, Julian. The hormones, the fear of the delivery, the stress from work. I lost my grip. I see that now. I pushed you away when I needed you the most. I am sorry. I am so sorry for acting crazy. Please, I need you. I cannot do this without you. Just let me come home. I will do whatever you say. I will sign whatever you need me to sign. Just let me be a mother." The silence in the room stretched. Julian studied my tear-streaked face. He saw exactly what he wanted to see: a brilliant independent forensic auditor reduced to a weeping dependent shell. The victory was too sweet for him to pass up. Sending me to a facility would mean dealing with doctors, social workers, and potential legal scrutiny. Having me subdued, compliant, and trapped in our house under his direct control was far more appealing. Julian sighed deeply, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He walked to the side of the bed and wrapped an arm around my trembling shoulders, pulling me into a suffocating, possessive embrace. "I promise to take care of you, Vivian," he murmured, kissing the top of my head. "I know you are sick. I know your mind is playing tricks on you. But I am your husband. I will protect you from yourself. We will go home together tomorrow. You will rest, and you will let me handle the complicated matters." "Thank you," I whispered against his expensive suit jacket, closing my eyes to hide the icy, calculating glare beneath my tears. "Thank you, Julian." The transition home was a masterclass in psychological control. Julian supervised my every move. He managed my medications, monitored my phone usage, under the guise of ensuring I rested and restricted Lauren's visits to tightly controlled 30-minute windows. I played the docile patient flawlessly. I agreed with his every suggestion, praised his dedication in front of the nursing staff, and allowed him to dictate the narrative of my fragile recovery. By the end of the week, our son was discharged from the NICU. Julian carried the baby carrier through the front door of our Buckhead home, beaming for the camera as his mother Beatrice snapped photographs for their social media circles. The image of the perfect, resilient family overcoming a tragic medical scare was instantly broadcasted to Atlanta's elite. Julian's ego inflated to dangerous, blinding proportions. He successfully silenced his wife, maintained his corporate facade, and continued funneling embezzled funds into his offshore accounts without a hitch. He felt untouchable. 3 weeks later, Julian announced his grand finale. He stood in the living room holding a crystal glass of bourbon, watching me feed the baby in the rocking chair. "The rumors at the firm are becoming tedious," he stated, swirling the amber liquid. "People are whispering about your mental breakdown at the baby shower. I need to crush this narrative before the quarterly board meeting. We are going to host a sip and see event this weekend. A small exclusive gathering for the executive board, the senior partners, and our closest friends. We will introduce the baby, and you will demonstrate that you are stable, happy, and fully recovered under my excellent care." I kept my eyes focused on the baby's soft, rhythmic breathing. "Of course, Julian," I replied meekly. "That sounds like a wonderful idea. I will contact the caterers tomorrow." And Vivian, Julian added, his voice dropping into a testing, provocative tone. "I am inviting some key members of my financial team. Sienna will be attending. She has been instrumental in managing my workload while I dealt with your medical crisis. You will be gracious to her. You will show the board that your previous hostility was merely a symptom of your illness." He was pushing his dominance to the absolute limit. He wanted to parade his mistress through my home in front of my child and force me to serve her drinks while the executives praised his leadership. He wanted to cement his absolute control over my reality. I did not flinch. I looked up and offered him a serene, hollow smile. "I understand, Julian. I will make sure she feels welcome." The night of the sip and see arrived. The house transformed into a glowing, opulent showcase. Soft jazz floated through the surround sound speakers. A team of hired waiters circulated with trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres and crystal flutes of vintage champagne. The living room was packed with the apex of Atlanta's corporate hierarchy. The CEO of Julian's insurance firm, a stern, imposing man named Richard Sterling, stood by the fireplace discussing golf handicaps with Beatrice. Julian worked the room with effortless charm, accepting congratulations and sympathetic pats on the back for enduring his wife's difficult pregnancy. I stood by the kitchen island, dressed in an elegant conservative emerald gown, holding a glass of sparkling water. I smiled. I made polite small talk. I played the role of the recovering grateful wife with sickening perfection. The front door opened, and Sienna stepped into the foyer. She wore a daring, form-fitting crimson dress that blatantly violated the unspoken dress code for a daytime infant celebration. She carried a small, impeccably wrapped gift box. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on Julian, who offered her a subtle, approving nod from across the room. Sienna walked directly toward the kitchen island, a predatory smirk playing on her lips. The sheer audacity of her presence made the air in the room feel heavy. She stopped in front of me, looking me up and down with barely concealed contempt. "Vivian," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "the house looks beautiful. Julian mentioned you were finally feeling up to hosting. We have all been so worried about your little episodes." I picked up a bottle of chilled champagne from the silver ice bucket. I held a crystal flute and poured the bubbling liquid, ensuring my hand remained perfectly steady. I handed the glass to the woman who was helping my husband destroy my life. "Thank you, Sienna," I replied, my voice smooth and untroubled. "I am doing much better now. I appreciate you covering for Julian at the office. He tells me you handle all the special projects." Sienna took a slow sip of the champagne, leaning in slightly, her smirk widening into a look of absolute triumph. "Oh, I handle a lot of things for Julian," she whispered, ensuring only I could hear. "You should really enjoy this party, Vivian. Julian told me his lawyers are finalizing the custody petition next week. You are going to look terrible in court." She turned on her heel and walked away, mingling into the crowd of executives, leaving me standing by the ice bucket. She believed she delivered the killing blow. She thought I was a broken, defenseless woman trapped in a crumbling marriage, forced to serve drinks to my replacement. I watched her laugh at a joke Julian told the CEO. I watched Beatrice offer Sienna a warm, welcoming smile, confirming the mother-in-law's full complicity in the affair. They were all so confident in their victory. They were celebrating their success on a stage I had carefully rigged with dynamite. I glanced at the grandfather clock in the hallway. It was 7:45. The guests were relaxed, the drinks were flowing, and Julian's ego was inflated to its absolute peak. It was time to lock the doors and light the match. The crystal chandelier above the grand staircase cast a warm golden glow over the crowded living room. The soft murmur of high society networking filled the space, punctuated by the clinking of expensive glassware and the occasional burst of polite corporate laughter. The air smelled of roasted hors d'oeuvres and the mingling of heavily priced designer perfumes. Julian stood in the center of it all, his hand resting comfortably on the small of my back, posing for a photograph with the chief financial officer of his firm. He looked every bit the triumphant executive and devoted family man, soaking in the admiration of his peers. I maintained the serene, compliant smile I had worn for weeks, allowing the flash of the camera to blind me momentarily. As the CFO moved away to refill his glass, Julian leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear. "You are doing well, Vivian," he murmured, his tone patronizing, masking the underlying threat. "Keep it up. The CEO is very impressed with your recovery. Do not ruin this." He patted my waist and stepped away to greet another incoming partner. I watched him glide through the room, shaking hands and sharing quiet, confident jokes. He believed he had orchestrated the perfect evening, cementing his professional standing, while publicly demonstrating his absolute control over his supposedly unstable wife. Sienna drifted through the crowd, holding her champagne flute like a trophy. She wore her crimson dress like armor, clearly relishing the illicit thrill of parading her affair right under the noses of Julian's colleagues and family. She spotted me standing alone near the archway leading to the dining room and altered her path, zeroing in for another calculated strike. She stopped beside me, pretending to admire a floral arrangement resting on the console table. The heavy scent of the Tom Ford perfume hit me instantly, the same fragrance that had invaded my bathroom weeks ago. "You really put together a lovely spread, Vivian." Sienna said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, loud enough for a passing waiter to hear. Then she leaned in, her voice dropping to a vicious, gloating whisper. "Enjoy the spotlight tonight. Julian's lawyers are filing the commitment papers on Monday. He is securing a private psychiatric facility for you upstate. I already picked out the new nursery furniture for his downtown penthouse. I am going to be a much better mother to that baby than a crazy woman ever could be." The sheer venom of her words was designed to provoke a hysterical reaction. She wanted me to snap. She wanted me to throw my drink in her face, scream at her, and validate every lie Julian had meticulously planted in the minds of the executives currently sipping our champagne. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I looked at the 25-year-old junior analyst who thought she was a mastermind, recognizing the pathetic reality of her situation. She was nothing more than a disposable pawn in Julian's federal fraud scheme, completely blind to the fact that her name was stamped on every illegal offshore wire transfer. I offered her a slow, cold smile, the kind of smile that does not reach the eyes. "Enjoy the champagne, Sienna," I replied, my voice dangerously calm and completely devoid of the fragility she expected. "It is a very expensive vintage." Sienna frowned, the smug certainty faltering for a fraction of a second, confused by my lack of panic. Before she could formulate a response, I turned my back on her and walked away. I caught Lauren's eye across the room. My sister was standing near the staircase, holding my newborn son, wrapped in a soft blue cashmere blanket. We had rehearsed this exact moment. I gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. Lauren immediately turned and carried the baby up the stairs, heading straight for the nursery. I heard the distinct heavy click of the solid core door locking behind her. My son was safe, insulated from the blast zone I was about to create on the ground floor. I walked purposefully toward the small raised platform near the fireplace, an area normally reserved for acoustic musicians during our holiday parties. The room was packed with the apex of Atlanta's corporate elite. Richard Sterling, the imposing CEO of Julian's insurance group, stood near the bar, nursing a scotch. Beatrice, my mother-in-law, was holding court near the bay windows, boasting to a group of executives' wives about her son's incredible resilience. Marcus stood quietly in the far corner near the main entrance, his dark eyes tracking the room with lethal precision. He checked his watch and gave me a brief, confirming look. The pieces were in place. I picked up a fresh crystal champagne flute from a passing waiter's tray. I grabbed a small silver serving spoon. The clinking sound of metal against crystal cut sharply through the ambient noise of the party. Ting, ting, ting. The soft jazz music playing over the speakers faded out as Marcus subtly cut the audio feed from his phone. The sudden silence rippled through the expansive living room. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Heads turned. 50 pairs of eyes shifted their focus away from their drinks and locked onto me standing on the platform. Julian, standing near the center of the room, stopped mid-laugh. A flicker of irritation crossed his face, quickly masked by an indulgent, encouraging smile. He assumed I was about to deliver a tearful, embarrassing speech, thanking him for his unwavering support during my fabricated mental health crisis. He thought I was about to publicly surrender. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began. My voice did not shake. It carried across the room, crisp, clear, and ringing with absolute authority. The fragile, subdued persona I had worn for weeks vanished instantly, replaced by the commanding presence of a senior forensic auditor addressing a boardroom. "We gathered you here to celebrate new beginnings." I continued, letting my gaze sweep across the faces of the executives, the partners, and finally resting on Julian. But before we toast to the future, I prepared a special token of appreciation for a few key individuals who have been instrumental in managing my husband's affairs over the past 18 months. Julian's brow furrowed slightly. This was not the script he had coerced me into memorizing. He took a half step forward, his eyes darting toward the hallway, a sudden primal instinct warning him that he had lost control of the narrative. I raised my hand, signaling Marcus. Marcus stepped out from the shadows near the entrance. He did not carry a tray of party favors. He held a stack of thick, sealed, legal-sized envelopes. He moved through the silent crowd with the grim, inevitable purpose of an executioner handing out the envelopes with precise deliberation. He handed the first envelope to Richard Sterling, the CEO. He handed the second envelope to Beatrice, whose smile had frozen into a mask of confused apprehension. He handed the third envelope to the chief compliance officer of Julian's firm. Finally, Marcus walked directly up to Julian and pressed a heavy envelope against his chest, forcing my husband to take it. Julian stared down at the blank manila envelope in his hands. A bead of sweat formed at his temple, catching the light from the chandelier. "Vivian," he said, his voice tight, attempting to project a calm authority he no longer possessed. "What is this?" We agreed to keep the speeches brief. I did not answer him. I looked directly at Richard Sterling, the CEO. "Mr. Sterling," I addressed the powerful executive, my voice echoing in the dead silent room. "Please open your envelope. I believe you will find the contents far more engaging than my medical history." The air in the room grew thick, suffocatingly tense. The guests held their breath, sensing the sudden, violent shift in the atmosphere. The stage was set. The audience was captive. The predator was cornered in his own home, entirely unaware that the trap he thought he escaped had just slammed shut around his neck. "Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight," I said, allowing a bright, radiant smile to spread across my face. The expression was practiced, molded to project the image of a grateful, recovering wife hosting a joyous celebration. I let my gaze sweep over the packed living room, meeting the eyes of the corporate executives, the senior partners, and the high society friends Julian had assembled for his grand performance. Today is a celebration of new life and new beginnings. We are here to honor the future of our family. Julian stood just a few feet away, adjusting his silk tie. A smug, self-satisfied grin rested on his lips. He puffed out his chest silently, soaking in the attention of his peers. He believed I was following his script. He assumed I was about to deliver a tearful, humiliating monologue, thanking him for his boundless patience during my fabricated mental health crisis. Earlier that week, he had demanded I prepare a comprehensive investment portfolio to present to the board members at this party, a prop to showcase his financial acumen. He thought the envelopes Marcus held contained those sanitized, complimentary financial projections. He thought he had trained me to be his perfect, obedient shield. But a gathering this significant requires more than just champagne and polite conversation. I continued, my tone shifting ever so slightly, shedding the fragile vulnerability I had worn for the past month. "I have prepared some very special tokens of appreciation for our VIP guests, items that truly capture the essence of my husband's recent activities." I offered a subtle nod toward the back of the room. Marcus stepped out from the shadows near the grand staircase. He did not carry a tray of party favors. He held a stack of thick, heavy manila envelopes sealed with red, tamper-evident tape. His polished leather shoes made no sound against the hardwood floor as he moved through the crowd with the grim, inevitable purpose of an executioner delivering final verdicts. Marcus approached Beatrice and Gregory Julian's parents, who were standing near the bay windows. He handed a thick envelope to Beatrice. She accepted it with a hesitant, aristocratic flutter of her eyelashes, her manicured fingers grazing the heavy paper. Marcus moved next to the center of the room. He handed a second envelope to Richard Sterling, the imposing CEO of Julian's insurance group, and a third to the firm's chief compliance officer standing right beside him. Finally, Marcus walked toward the far corner of the living room, bypassing the catering staff, and handed the last two envelopes to a pair of quiet, unassuming men in dark suits who had arrived late and kept to themselves near the patio doors. Julian watched his brother-in-law distribute the packages. A brief flicker of confusion crossed Julian's face, but his towering arrogance quickly suppressed it. He shot me a patronizing, approving nod, silently praising what he perceived as my flawless execution of his corporate marketing strategy. He turned to a senior partner standing nearby and whispered a confident joke, raising his crystal flute in a mock toast. "Please open them," I said. My voice was no longer sweet. It dropped into a register of cold, unforgiving steel. The radiant smile vanished from my face, replaced by the lethal, detached focus of a senior forensic auditor concluding a fraud investigation. The command echoed through the silent room. The temperature in the living room seemed to plummet. The guests who had not received envelopes held their breath, sensing the sudden sharp shift in the atmosphere. The heavy, tearing sound of thick paper ripping open echoed from different corners of the room in rapid succession. Beatrice was the first to pull the contents from her envelope. She expected to see glossy ultrasound photos or a customized nursery layout. Instead, her eyes landed on a stack of high-resolution, full-color photographs printed on premium photo paper. I watched her perfectly lifted brow furrow in confusion before her eyes widened in sheer horror. The crystal wineglass slipped from Beatrice's trembling fingers. It plummeted to the floor, shattering against the white marble tiles. Deep red wine splashed across the pristine stone, pooling like blood at the tips of her designer heels. The sharp crash of the breaking glass shattered the remaining tension in the room. Julian's smug smile died instantly. He whipped his head toward his mother, then back to me, the color draining rapidly from his face. His confident posture collapsed, his shoulders dropping, as a primal, suffocating panic seized his features. The documents inside those envelopes were a forensic masterpiece. Richard Sterling, the CEO, pulled a thick stack of financial ledgers from his package. I had bypassed the standard executive summaries and provided the raw, undeniable data. The first page was a comprehensive routing map detailing a systematic embezzlement scheme. The spreadsheet highlighted $2.2 million siphoned directly from his firm's corporate treasury over the past 18 months. The data showed the funds routed through a phantom vendor identified as Vertex Horizon LLC. The chief compliance officer pulled out a pair of reading glasses, his hands shaking as he reviewed the attached incorporation documents. The state registry papers clearly listed Sienna Brooks as the sole managing director of Vertex Horizon LLC. Attached to those papers were the IP address logs I had secured, proving that every single fraudulent invoice was approved and authorized from Julian's secure executive terminal. Julian's narrative of a dedicated, hard-working financial director evaporated in an instant, replaced by the irrefutable evidence of federal wire fraud. He had stolen millions from the men standing right next to him. But the financial ruin was only half of the trap. Beatrice dropped to her knees, scrambling to pick up the photographs she had dropped, but the images were already visible to the guests standing around her. The micro cameras Marcus's technician had installed in my home captured everything in flawless 4K resolution. The top photograph showed Julian standing in our foyer, his hands wrapped intimately around Sienna's waist, their lips locked together. The timestamp printed in the bottom corner of the image matched the exact date and time Julian claimed he was trapped in an emergency board meeting. The second photograph was a crisp, undeniable shot of Julian and Sienna sitting on my living room sofa, drinking my expensive bourbon, while Sienna draped her silk scarf over the back of the couch. The visual proof of his infidelity, conducted inside the marital home, while his pregnant wife was undergoing medical evaluations, laid his moral bankruptcy bare for his entire social circle to witness. The final document in the packet was a copy of the forged digital power of attorney application. The page included the metadata I had extracted, displaying Julian's personal cell phone IP address, time-stamped at 2 a.m, executing a fraudulent $2.4 million mortgage against my property. Sienna, who had been lingering near the catering table, waiting to bask in her illicit victory, peered over the shoulder of a stunned executive. She saw her own name printed on the LLC registration forms. She saw the wire transfer amounts. The arrogant smirk melted off her face. Her eyes darted wildly around the room. She realized in that exact moment that she was not Julian's grand romance. She was the registered fall guy for a multi-million-dollar federal crime. Julian took a shaky, uneven step forward. His mouth open, desperately searching for a lie, an excuse, a way to spin the devastating evidence resting in the hands of his superiors. He looked at his mother, who was weeping silently on the floor. He looked at Richard Sterling, whose face had turned a deep, furious shade of crimson. Julian looked at me. His chest heaved, his breathing shallow and erratic. He was suffocating under the weight of his own hubris. He realized the compliant, broken woman he had brought home from the hospital was a Trojan horse. He thought he had successfully isolated me, silenced me with legal threats, and trapped me in a cage of public opinion. He did not realize I had spent the last month building an ironclad federal indictment, waiting for the perfect audience to witness his execution. The silence in the living room shattered, replaced by the collective intake of breath from the gathered elite. Julian stood rooted to the hardwood floor. His eyes darted from the scattered photographs at his mother's feet to the thick financial ledgers clutched in his chief executive's hands. The smug, untouchable aura he carried into the room dissolved into a pale, sweating mask of sheer panic. He took a hesitant step forward, raising his hands in a placating gesture, a desperate attempt to regain control of a narrative that was already burning to ash. Vivian Julian stammered, his voice lacking its usual smooth resonance. His vocal cords tightened, making the words come out thin and reedy. "What kind of sick prank is this? You are unwell. You need to go upstairs." I did not move an inch. I kept my posture rigid, my chin raised, letting the cold silence answer him. Around the room, the high society guests began to whisper. The subtle rustle of expensive fabrics echoed as people shifted away from Julian, creating a physical void around him. Cell phones emerged from clutches and suit pockets. The soft, rhythmic clicking of camera shutters filled the air. The attendees, people Julian spent years trying to impress, were now recording his demise in real time. Richard, the chief executive of the insurance group, did not look at the cameras. He kept his eyes locked on the second page of the forensic ledger. The ink detailed the exact routing numbers moving $2.2 million from the corporate treasury into a hidden offshore trust. A dark, furious flush crept up Richard's neck. The veins near his temples pulsed. He was a man who built an empire on trust, and he was currently holding undeniable proof that his own financial director had bled him dry. "Richard, please," Julian begged, pivoting his attention to his boss. The desperation in his eyes mirrored a cornered animal. "Those documents are fabricated. My wife is suffering from a documented psychiatric break. She forged these numbers to punish me. I can explain everything if we just step into the study." The chief executive did not step into the study. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. The fury radiating from the older man caused the nearby guests to scramble backward. Richard raised the thick stack of forensic evidence and hurled it directly at Julian's chest. The heavy papers hit Julian with a sharp smack, scattering across the floor like dead leaves. "You are fired, you miserable scum!" Richard roared. His voice shook the crystal fixtures on the wall sconces. "You stole from my company. You routed client funds through a fake vendor. I will spend every dime I have ensuring you never see the inside of a boardroom again. Get out of my sight." Julian stumbled backward, the verbal assault striking him harder than a physical blow. He opened his mouth, searching for a lifeline, a loophole, a lie that could save him. He found nothing. His pristine reputation, the currency he valued above all else, evaporated in front of his peers. Before Julian could retreat toward the foyer, the atmosphere shifted once more. The 2 quiet men in dark suits, the ones Marcus had stationed near the patio doors, stepped forward. They did not raise their voices. They did not rush. They moved with the synchronized, calculated precision of men who hunted predators for a living. Marcus stood near the hallway, his arms folded across his broad chest, a grim smile resting on his lips. He gave the 2 men a brief nod. The guests parted, forming a wide aisle. The 2 men walked straight toward Julian. They reached into their tailored jackets in unison. They did not pull out weapons. They pulled out leather wallets, flipping them open to display shining gold shields. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division," the lead agent announced. His voice was flat, carrying the unyielding weight of the United States government. "Julian, you are under arrest." The collective gasp from the crowd sucked the remaining oxygen from the room. The cell phone cameras angled closer, capturing every grueling second. Julian's eyes widened to the point of tearing. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow, terrified shell. He shook his head slowly, his hands trembling at his sides. "You have the wrong man," Julian whispered, his voice cracking. "This is a domestic dispute. My wife is trying to ruin me." The lead agent did not entertain the excuse. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his inner pocket. "We hold a federal warrant for your arrest regarding multiple counts of wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and the forgery of digital financial instruments." The agent recited the charges with clinical detachment. The second agent stepped behind Julian. He grabbed my husband's wrists, forcing them behind his back. Julian winced, his shoulders twisting as the agent pulled his arms into an unnatural angle. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping closed echoed over the murmurs of the crowd. The cold metal bound Julian's wrists together, ruining the lines of his expensive bespoke suit. Julian struggled against the restraint, casting desperate glances around the room. He looked at his mother Beatrice, who was still kneeling on the marble floor amidst the broken glass and scattered photographs. She covered her face with her hands, weeping in profound humiliation, refusing to meet her son's eyes. He looked at the chief executive, who turned his back in sheer disgust. Finally, Julian looked at me. Standing on the raised platform, I stared back at him. I offered no tears, no sympathy, no hesitation. The man who spent months gaslighting me, who tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward, who stole the money meant to protect our newborn son, was now a powerless captive. The narcissist was crushed, not by a screaming match, not by an emotional plea, but by the relentless grinding gears of the federal justice system. His ego shattered, leaving behind nothing but a scared, pathetic criminal. While the agents secured Julian, a separate panic unfolded near the catering tables. Sienna, the mistress, who walked into my home with a smug smile and a designer dress, realized the true scope of the disaster. She watched the federal agents recite the wire fraud charges. She heard the name of her shell company mentioned in the warrant. The arrogant sneer she wore all evening melted into sheer terror. Sienna understood that Julian had used her name on the LLC registration documents. She was the listed managing director of the fraudulent vendor account. The federal government would not view her as a naive lover. They would view her as a co-conspirator. She backed away from the crowd, her eyes darting toward the heavy glass doors leading to the rear patio. She took a step backward, then another, attempting to slip unnoticed into the dark garden. She did not make it past the threshold. 2 broad-shouldered security contractors. The men I hired to patrol the perimeter stepped into the doorway, blocking her exit. Their faces were stony, unyielding barriers. Sienna gasped, clutching her small purse to her chest. She spun around, seeking another escape route, only to find the second federal agent walking purposefully toward her. Sienna Brooks. The agent asked, his tone leaving no room for denial. Sienna trembled, her bottom lip quivering. "I did not do anything," she stammered, her voice high and frantic. "Julian told me it was just a startup fund. I just signed the papers. I did not know about the corporate money. Please, you have to believe me." The agent produced a second pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Your signature is on the corporate registry and the receiving offshore accounts. You are being detained for questioning regarding conspiracy to commit money laundering and federal wire fraud. No, no, please." Sienna cried out, tears ruining her meticulous makeup. She looked at Julian, begging him to intervene to save her. Julian kept his head bowed, staring at the floor, refusing to acknowledge the woman he used as a human shield. The agent secured Sienna's wrists, ignoring her panicked sobbing. I stood tall on the platform, watching the scene unfold with a cold, steady heart. I spent weeks suffocating under Julian's psychological warfare. I endured his threats, his mother's insults, and his mistress's taunts. I protected my unborn child while planning a counterstrike that would leave no survivors. The agents guided Julian toward the front door. He shuffled his feet, his posture broken, his chin resting against his chest. The flashes from the guests' phone cameras illuminated his humiliating exit, guaranteeing that his downfall would be broadcast across the city before morning. Sienna followed closely behind, escorted by the second agent, her frantic sobs echoing off the foyer walls. The heavy oak door opened, revealing the flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles waiting in my driveway. The agents led the 2 criminals out into the cool evening air. The door clicked shut, severing Julian and Sienna from the luxurious world they tried to steal. The living room fell into a stunned, breathless hush. The elite guests, the executives, the high society friends who had judged me, whispered about me, and pitied me, now stared at me with wide-eyed awe. I was no longer the fragile, delusional wife they gossiped about over tea. I was the architect of the most spectacular corporate and personal execution they had ever witnessed. I stepped down from the platform, my heels clicking softly against the wood. Marcus walked over to me, offering a respectful nod. The trap worked flawlessly. He noted, his voice a low, steady rumble. I looked at the scattered financial documents, the broken glass, and the empty space where my husband used to stand. The justice I sought did not require me to raise my voice. It only required the truth delivered with lethal precision. Richard, the chief executive, turned to Marcus, seeking confirmation. His hands still shook with the adrenaline of the betrayal. "Is the firm protected?" he asked, prioritizing his empire. Marcus adjusted his suit jacket. "My firm has already filed the injunctions to freeze the offshore accounts. The stolen assets will be recovered. You have the evidence you need to cleanse your board." Richard offered a curt nod of gratitude. He turned toward me, his expression softening from rage into a genuine, profound respect. "You endured hell to protect my company's assets, Vivian," he said. "I owe you a debt I cannot easily repay." "You owe me nothing, Richard," I replied, keeping my tone measured. "Julian tried to use his executive power to destroy my life. I simply used my auditing skills to protect my son." The weight of the past month lifted from my shoulders. The suffocating anxiety, the constant fear of losing my child to a fabricated mental health diagnosis evaporated. The federal justice system had removed the threat. The predator was caged. The truth was out in the open, undeniable and permanent. I looked toward the staircase, knowing Lauren and my newborn son were safe behind a locked door. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear, unclouded sky. The federal justice system moves with a grinding, inevitable certainty. Julian's criminal proceedings lacked the theatrical suspense of a television drama. Federal prosecutors do not lose cases built on pristine digital evidence. The wire logs, the offshore routing numbers, and the forged digital signatures provided a labyrinth of guilt Julian could not navigate. Faced with the reality of a lengthy trial, his high-priced defense attorney advised him to take a plea deal. He stood before a federal judge wearing a plain orange jumpsuit stripped of his tailored suits and his arrogant posture. The judge handed down a 15-year sentence in a minimum security federal penitentiary. Sienna did not stand by his side. The illicit romance they paraded in Aspen fractured the second the authorities froze the hidden bank accounts. Offered a reduced sentence in exchange for her cooperation, Sienna turned state evidence without hesitation. She sat in a sterile interrogation room and detailed every instruction Julian gave her, handing the prosecutors the final nails for his coffin. She traded his freedom for a plea bargain, earning a 3-year probation sentence and a permanent felony record. Their love story ended not with a romantic farewell, but with a signed affidavit and a desperate scramble for self-preservation. The fraudulent second mortgage on my Buckhead home dissolved. Marcus worked alongside the banking executives to invalidate the forged electronic signatures. The deed remained solely in my name, unburdened by Julian's theft. The $2.2 million siphoned from the insurance group was intercepted offshore and returned to the corporate treasury. The $80,000 stolen from my maternity fund was recovered during the asset seizure and deposited back into my primary account. The financial extraction was flawless, restoring the safety net meant for my child. My accounting firm called me 3 days after the arrest. The managing partner who had placed me on involuntary leave sat across from me in his corner office, offering a profound, humbled apology. The narrative of my supposed mental breakdown vanished, replaced by the indisputable fact that I had engineered the downfall of a white-collar criminal while protecting a newborn child. They offered me a promotion to senior partner, recognizing the lethal precision of my forensic skills. I accepted the position on my own terms, securing an extended, fully paid maternity leave before assuming my new title. The final loose end attempted to unravel on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 2 months after the trial concluded. The doorbell chimed. I checked the security feed on my encrypted tablet. Beatrice stood on the front porch. The aristocratic, untouchable matriarch who had mocked my pregnancy and enabled her son's infidelity looked entirely broken. Her designer coat hung loosely on her frame. Her face was pale, lacking her usual flawless makeup. She clutched a small wrapped gift box against her chest. I did not open the door. Marcus, who had stopped by to review some final custody documents, walked to the foyer. He pulled the heavy oak door open just wide enough to stand in the threshold, blocking her view of the house interior. Vivian, Beatrice pleaded, her voice cracking, stripped of its former venom. "Please, I just want to see my grandson. He is all I have left of my family. Julian is gone. My friends have abandoned me. Please let me see the baby." Marcus did not offer a shred of sympathy. He reached into his leather portfolio and withdrew a crisp, folded legal document. He handed it to Beatrice. "This is a permanent restraining order," Marcus stated, his deep voice carrying the weight of a judge delivering a sentence. "It bars you from coming within 500 feet of Vivian, her home, her workplace, and her child. You enabled a man who tried to destroy this family. You stood by while he attempted to commit a mother to a psychiatric ward to steal her assets. You do not get to play the grieving grandmother now." Beatrice stared at the paper in her trembling hands. The reality of her isolation settled over her. She had chosen to support a predator, and now she would spend her twilight years entirely alone, locked out of the lineage she valued so highly. She turned and walked slowly down the driveway, the rain soaking her coat. Marcus closed the door, securing the deadbolt. 6 months have passed since that evening in the living room. The house in Buckhead is no longer a battleground or a stage for corporate theater. It is a home. The morning sun streams through the bay windows, casting warm golden light across the hardwood floors. I sit in the oversized armchair near the fireplace, holding a porcelain mug of Earl Grey tea. The house is quiet, save for the comforting rhythmic sound of breathing coming from the bassinet beside me. My son lies there, swaddled in a soft cotton blanket, his tiny chest rising and falling in a deep, peaceful sleep. He is healthy, thriving, and entirely unaware of the storm that raged before his arrival. From the kitchen, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafts into the living room. Lauren and Marcus are standing by the marble island preparing breakfast. Lauren laughs at a joke. Marcus makes a bright, joyous sound that fills the open floor plan. Marcus smiles, pouring coffee into 2 mugs, his presence a constant reassuring anchor. They are my family. I learned through the fire of betrayal that family is not defined by a marriage certificate or shared DNA. Family is the people who stand in front of the storm for you. They are the people who help you lock down the servers, who hold your hand in the surgical bay, and who serve the restraining orders to those who seek to harm you. Julian believed he could strip away my sanity, my wealth, and my child. He thought power belonged to the loudest voice in the room. He learned the hard way that true power operates in silence. I did not need to scream to win. I only needed the truth meticulously documented and delivered to the right audience. The revenge I sought did not involve dramatic confrontations or bitter shouting matches. The ultimate retaliation was allowing the federal justice system to grind him into dust while I reclaimed my peace. He sits in a concrete cell, stripped of his luxury watches and his corporate titles, while I sit in my sunlit living room, holding my child, surrounded by the people who truly love me. If you are watching this and finding yourself trapped in a narrative written by someone who wants to break you, remember this. You are not the fragile character they portray. You hold the pen, gather your evidence, keep your silence, build your case in the dark. When the time is right, hand them the match and watch them burn down their own empire. Thank you for listening to my journey today. If my experience gave you the courage to look closer at your own reality, please subscribe to Hazel Tells Stories for more true accounts of survival and justice. Your peace is worth fighting for. See you next time.